hopefully that's okay with everybody. We're going to start things off a little bit different than usual. Instead of diving in and just talking about a couple things that we were interested in, we wanted to start off with a couple questions from the audience. Go ahead and just let people ask questions, see what comes up, and not save that till the end. And then we've got a couple interesting topics that we want to dive into after that. So first, just hello, welcome everybody. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe, and check out all the links and stuff down below, and start asking any questions that you guys happen to have. And hey, Jason and Andrew, thanks to everybody for being here. And I don't know if you guys want to say hello to everybody as well.
Hello to everybody as well.
Oh, that was nice and quiet. Did you lose all your volume there, Andrew?
Was it quiet?
Yeah, you've gone very quiet all of a sudden.
He's disappeared. So, hello, Jason. he was totally fine right before we started. So yeah, if you guys have any just Unity questions, GameDev questions in the chat, feel free to drop them in. And then if not, we'll jump into a bunch of other stuff. But I assume that there are a couple of things. I just want to make sure that people got a chance to ask those right away and we could get into them. All right, Andrew, is your voice back?
Let me see. Is my
Nope.
voice back?
No, it's still very quiet.
Still sounds silent. Yeah.
Maybe it switched devices on you.
Now.
Oh,
yeah. I hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't have another application open at the same time. Apparently, it messes with the audio.
Oh, I know what you've got. So this is actually while we're waiting for questions to roll in. Here's something to keep an eye on. If you're using a communication device in Windows, often they do this thing called ducking. So it's basically the idea that if you have system sounds versus your chat sounds, it tries to favor one over the other. So there's a good chance that's what's happening. So if you go into your sound settings option, so if you again you're on Mac. Sorry, no, forget.
But it might be something similar. I was scheduling a live chat for later today, and I had my Ecamm Live open. So my guess is it was somehow co-opting my microphone, and I have another microphone set for that. But who knows? Who knows?
I have to say, it always throws me for a loop. I'm always like, the minute there's a technical issue, I'm like, aha, okay, so here's how it happens. And then it's like, always forget. None of that applies to you.
Yeah. The issue here, you got a Mac. I just reboot every time something goes wrong now. So the first question already came in. So for smaller games, would one scene make sense? What do you guys think? I think generally yes. Yeah. A lot of the time, if the game is small enough, having it in a single scene handles everything. If the entirety of restarting your game is just reloading that scene, and that means your game is reloaded and done, then definitely.
Sure. That means like title screen, score screen, everything.
Yeah. I would say sometimes it's actually easier to do it that way. I mean, the truth is, right, it's kind of one of those ones where this answers every similar style question. The whole point of any of these things, multi-scenes or single scenes, you can go into the nitty-gritty about performance and all that stuff, but the truth is, it's about workflow. And as long as something isn't painful to work with, it's fine. The reason why you migrate from any version of a pattern or architecture or system to another is because the first way is a pain in the ass, right? At some point, it starts to become harder to work with, or it causes more issues than it does help. And if you've got a small project and everything can just fit in a scene, and you can turn on and off a game object that represents a title screen, go for it. It's just, it might hit a point where the scene starts to get messy, or there's too many things, or you're getting events issues because you've got multiple stuff. Once that happens, then you can stop and ask yourself, hang on a second, what if I split up the levels from all the menu stuff? Suddenly that's easier to work with. If it's not easier to work with, don't do it, right? It's the entire point is if it helps you. If it doesn't help you, then don't do it.
I think that was a perfect explanation there. So book recommendations, clean code or code complete? That's a tough one. I think I would generally go with clean code, but I really liked some chapters in code complete too. It's been so long though that now they kind of blend together for me as a book too, so it makes it a little bit harder.
So I got a hot take from someone else who gave me this advice, which I used to say the same. I'd recommend both. And somebody said, "Have you read Code Complete again recently?" And I said, "No, I read it a long time ago. I haven't read it in a while." And they said, "Go back and just reread it." And it is a good book, but it's also a bit dated in terms of the references and stuff that it uses. And it's one of those things where it might actually be harder to teach somebody with, because it's not as it's hard to get into, as opposed to a lot of more modern books that would be applied kind of designed around what the technologies look like now. So I would say, on someone else's advice, that they suggested stick with other books like Clean Code because they're, for lack of a better word, timeless. So I would say if you're looking for something that will guaranteed add you value as a programmer, and will apply to what you're doing regardless of what you're doing, Clean Code pretty much fits the bill. It's the most universally every dev should read programming book, in my opinion, specifically because it doesn't talk about code specifically. It talks about writing good the concept of good code conceptually, regardless of where you are or who you're with or what the project is. It's just how to make code better and how to work with it better. So I think that's the most universally valuable book.
It's good. I should go back through them again too. I think that's something I haven't done in quite a long time. So I think that's good advice. I'm gonna stick with your recommendation there. I like that. So somebody that you'd talk to just recommended that after going through them again.
Yeah,
I
they
assume you
said to
took a
me,
look at it.
yeah, I also had the same problem where I recommended some other course to somebody and they said they tried it, but it was suddenly using like WinForm stuff and they got very confused. And it was like I had to stop and reevaluate the resources I give people because a lot of the books and things that I read, again, we're talking like 8, 10, 12 years ago. So some of this stuff, while it was perfectly fine and representative at the time, some of it may not be as relevant now. Now, again, the principles are always the same. If you're willing to look past that, it's perfectly fine. The example I've used before is I read a book on AI that's written in C++ before I ever learned anything with C++, and I could still read it fine because at the end of the day, you're learning about the principles and the code is just simple snippets of examples. So I wouldn't worry too much, but if you are trying to follow along, some of the older books might be using Visual Studio 2005 or something, and you might end up finding yourself getting a bit lost with certain things. So, as a rule, I'm trying to find more up to date resources as I go forward. And if I'm going to recommend a book, I'd rather it be something that is more up to date or timeless. For example, I only found out recently enough that there is actually a version of Head First Design Patterns that's C Sharp, more modern 2020 edition or something. And I never read that one. The one I have is the older the one I had. So I'm kind of tempted to check that one out too and see if it's a better. I recommend that one now anyway, but I should probably read it and see if it's changed much.
Yeah, I'll have to check that one out. I'm curious. So there was another question about manage or to practice project management skills. Now I am far from a good project manager. I think it's like one of my biggest weaknesses. So I'm kind of curious what you guys think on this one. Like, you both are probably much better at managing projects and just teams in general. Like I've got my own workflow, but it's a bit of a sloppy mess. I'm curious what you guys think.
For me, it's practice is the key word there. Like I know it's better to stay on top of myself and keep myself organized and on track. But I also know that, largely I don't necessarily have to. So sometimes you just forget to go back to that tracker and click a few buttons or type in that little thing you did today that, today you think is not that big of a deal, but 3 weeks from now you've forgotten about it. So I have to force myself to constantly do project management rather than just do the project, right? And force myself to go online. We, in Infinity PBR, we use an Airtable to keep track of what everyone's working on. And we have a little section where we put who we are, the date, and what our comment is, and making sure to do that all the time and to always make sure the right person is tagged and all that stuff. It takes time. And sometimes it's like, it's just a small thing, but in the end, it keeps us organized 3 weeks from now, I think is the best way to explain the benefit that I get from it. It's not necessarily about today, it's about tomorrow and when I've forgotten everything that I did.
This is the one you're using, Airtable?
Yeah, Airtable. I use it at the day job, so I already knew how to use it. And then there's a free tier, as they often have. And so literally it's just tagging people and organizing different, one row per project. And, there's uploads, so people can upload files. You can link to, examples or upload examples. You can tag people. There's cross collaboration. So if someone who's doing Unreal migration for some of my assets can tag the animator and talk about animation stuff on the side, which is great because that means I don't have to connect them directly, which is what I used to have to do. They can just start talking to each other because they know they exist, and even though they've never met, and it's been helpful for sure. Keeping everyone abreast of what's going on, and also keeping me away from having to daily micromanage the interactions, because it's everything's on there rather than having me handle it, which is nice.
So kind of like automated away some of that project management.
Yeah, delegate it away, I suppose.
Or delegate, yeah.
To the people who really should. I mean, that's their role anyways, to manage their own projects. So it helps them do that as well.
I would say for a lot of people, it's so. Andrew's got the scale of an actual company, right? Like you've got people, you have people to work with. But I would say if we bring it back down to the level of the average person, people are terrible at managing their time, just in general. There's two people are really, really bad at it. And one of the biggest problems is people don't realize that one thing you touched on that's perfectly accurate is project management is a job in and of itself. You actually have to engage with it as a task. You can't just, it's not like a magical tool that will make you organized. You have to keep your brain on a portion of it on the process of managing a project. And so my biggest bit of advice to people is that it's about the process, not the tools. It's very easy to fall into the category of if I find the perfect tool, it'll keep me organized. But it wasn't until I read Getting Things Done that I stopped and realized it was so weird to me reading a book on how to get organized that didn't talk about any tool in particular. I was like, how does even an entire book on getting organized and he doesn't like talk about Evernote or talk about whatever? And he has an entire section where he actively says, I'm not going to recommend a tool to you because that doesn't matter. What matters is the process with which you deal with tasks. And that really made me think. And the thing I would say is if you want to get organized, if you're like me at least, you'll be distracted by shiny new tools regularly. And so if you go down that road, you'll never be organized because you keep focusing whatever the new toy is and you'll try to learn it and then it'll be too many things and you'll get confused, you'll get annoyed and you'll stop using it. What you want to do, if you truly, truly want to get something done, and you have to be really clear about this, there's a difference between it would be nice if I was more organized, versus here is a task, I want it done, I have 2 months, I want it done in 2 months. If you are truly trying to get something done, the way you do it is you get a stack of sticky notes and you put it on your desk, and then you figure out what is the task I'm trying to do, which steps need to be done to get it done, which steps need to be done today to get it done, and then you write down each task on the sticky note as an actual actionable task. You don't write something like make the health bar. You would say create the health UI, or create the canvas with the health on it or something like that. You'd be very specific about what you're doing and you break it into steps and then you do each one and you stick it on your wall as to do. And then when it's done, you move it over to done and you just do that. And what happens is over the course of time, you'll end up literally ticking away each step needs to be done. And then on the wall, you'll have a nice big list of completed parts of that project. And so the tools don't matter. Try to distill it down. Now, I would say though, if you're new to this, physical over digital is better because it's so much easier to just close a tab. It's easy to just not think about it. If you literally have a big board on your wall or you have something on your desk that's an ongoing thing of like moving objects, it's so much easier to engage with. It's more satisfying to like move a thing once you've finished the task, and it's very hard to get it out of your head. In my case, I stuck it up on my wall. Nice big, I'd come in, I'd go get a coffee, go to the bathroom, I'd come back, and it would be staring me in the face. I couldn't get away from it. It was the thing I am doing, and I would move it across as I would go. In short, project management is an active, ongoing process. And if you genuinely want to get something done, you have to turn your brain towards it. You have to tell yourself, um, ask yourself at any one time, is what I'm doing working towards my project? So you say, I am trying to make this game. Right now, I am working on the health system. To get the health system done, I need a health bar. I'm working on the health bar. That's what I'm sitting down and doing. There's no distractions, nothing else. I'm working on a health bar. The way to do it is step A, step B, step C. And you go through it. And you don't allow yourself to go off on a tangent. You work through it in the steps that need to get done. So you'll find, though, this may sound very daunting and if to a degree boring, but I'll be honest, it's once you get started, it's so easy to flow through one to the other because you build up momentum and you start having this like massive velocity of powering through projects. You'll be exhausted afterwards, but the point is you'll get a lot more done than you think you will because it's so easy When you sit down and you know what your task is, it's so easy to do. The reason why a lot of people have trouble with project management is because they sit down and vaguely know they want to make a thing that does some stuff. And then half of that time is spent meandering and Googling and kind of, oh, maybe I'll change the colors of this and I'll get a list of these things and that'll be nice and I'll draw some ideas. And they're not getting work done. What they're doing is they're thinking about the idea of maybe potentially doing some work. And if you sit down in advance and say, I need an X, the next step is Y, I am doing Y is done, what's next step? You'll get it done really fast. You'll be surprised how much time you actually have. You just have to engage your brain in that process.
Yeah, just sitting down with the actual tasks planned out, it does make a huge difference. I like just the advice too that the tool really doesn't matter, and using paper is, I just say, one of the best options. It's the easiest. I mean, when you're not collaborating, when you're collaborating, that's when the tools start to become a lot more valuable because you want to share that stuff. But when you're just working by yourself or you're in an office or something, just having it up on a board is really, really handy and really great. Totally agree, and I think that I don't have anything else to add. I don't know.
Can you tell I do this for a living? I consult people on how to do their project management. Right, this is something I know. I've done a lot of this stuff.
Project management's a tough one.
It is, and I would say one of the biggest issues that people mistake with project management is they write daunting tasks. It's so easy to write on your to-do list, clean house, and you've got this like pit in your stomach of, ugh, I have to clean the house. That is like, I don't get the reward of checking that off until I've spent 5 hours of going through nebulous tasks of, does doing the laundry count as cleaning part of the house, or what about the dishes, and where does the line of this, and am I done yet? That's the hardest part. When can you say you're done cleaning the house? Like, what is the mark when you've literally polished everything in that? No, that doesn't work because your brain is you're just going to be constantly depressed at the process of doing that. What you need to do is give yourself easier wins. Do the dishes, or wash the dishes, dry the dishes, put the dishes away. It may sound tedious, but if you write out 3 tasks, you get 3 rewards. You get to do 3 things. And at the end of the day, you will, as weird as it sounds, you will mark how productive you were based on how many checkboxes you hit. And it's kind of silly, but the more checkboxes you give yourself, the better you'll feel about it, the more you'll want to keep doing it, and the more checkboxes you'll actually get done. So writing these really specific, detailed tasks, like again, if I'm cleaning my office, I will specifically say, clean the table to my right, organize the shelves behind me, empty the bin. These are all individual tasks, and that way I will have a very detailed, completed list of done things. And I think that's
when we jump into a code one though, like, so say we're doing the same kind of thing in code, or like with a code project. What's the size that you like realistically try to break them down into? Because I mean, if you get too low, obviously, you'll be writing out a checklist for every single method that you're going to create. You're going to end up getting burned out of writing things out.
I'd say about 10-15 minutes of coding, roughly 10-15 minutes of.
Okay, I was thinking for me, it's usually like a half hour to 2 hour period. So I was kind of curious where you were on that block. 15. Okay.
No, well, because I think we do the same thing. I just think it's down. For example, because I've taken the course. I've literally watched you structure out the things. The only difference is, you'd have something like you'd have the notes of building a quest system, and then you'd mark the different parts of that, going, make the UI for the quest system, hook it up, do this persistent for the quest system. Each one of those.
Yeah.
All I would do is I would then stop at one of those, and I would say, this has 3 parts to it or 2 parts to it, and I would make sub bullet points, and then
you break them down even further.
Yeah, the difference is, I think again, the subtle difference is it a thing that you wish existed, or is it a thing that you have to do? And I think that's the trick. The name for it in getting things done is next actionable action. Like if you write build health system or do quest system, what is the next action on that? The thing is, right, there's a secret problem with writing make quest system on a to-do list, in that the first action you have to do on that is figure out what the first action you have to do is. You know what I mean?
Right. It's
like
design it, right? Design the system is number one.
Well, no, right. But my point is, like, you have to figure out if design system is the first. You know what I mean? Like, my point is, if you just have make quest system, what is the first step? Is it open the project? Is it do the quest? You know what I mean? You actually don't even know what the very first step is. You have to sit and think about it. It is probably design system. But my point is, if the name of the task isn't an action, you have the very first thing you do when you
Right.
read a to-do item is to figure out what the first action is.
Oh yeah.
If you write it down as an action, which is design X, then the very first thing you're doing is you look at it and you have to do an action. And you find it's a small thing, but that there's a mental cost in resolving the difference between a requirement and the task you're trying to do. So I basically say, how I go down my chain until I end up with actions, like individual actions that I'm performing. That's kind of as far as I go.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense though. Like I breaking it down just somewhere and getting into those levels. I think a lot of people don't do that at all. They just kind of keep it at that high level of build it, like the build a quest system. Like that's the whole goal, and then it's not an easily attainable, achievable, simple thing. Like I still kind of follow the simple, smart goals, right? Like making them specific and actionable and manage or whatever the other ones were, measurable and attainable is the main one. I want to make sure that everything that I'm targeting, like each little step, is something that I can get done in the amount of time that I've allotted to get it done in, so that I'm not able to do things, not get stuff done.
The problem is though, because I'm probably getting into the nitty gritty on this because it's an interesting topic for me. It's something I do a lot. Is if you're a manager, if you're like, so let's just take a small step out of you personally managing your time. If you are a manager of managing other people's time, you're in a kind of tougher position because you have to try to make sure people are efficient and doing their work, and it's very hard to be like that guy who's like being structurally mean about people's time. But if you're being analytical about this, let's be honest, the biggest cost of time per day is people messing about on the internet. It's what we all do, right? We search Reddit, we look at webcomics, we browse YouTube, we just do stuff that isn't work. Or if it's not general hobbies, it might just be I decided for this test I want to make like a little environment. So I want a tree for my demo project I'm doing right now. And suddenly you blink and you've wasted 45 minutes searching the asset stores for trees when that's not actually relevant to what you're doing. It's just a fun way to distract yourself from what you're doing. And if you're a manager of people and you're trying to stop people doing this, the way you do that is you don't allow this nebulous time. If the task is build selection system, and they can tell themselves part of build a selection system is finding some fun objects to select, then that's easy to distract yourself with useless, not very valuable effort. If the task is write code that makes selection system turn object on and off, then there's no room or time to go and find a tree. A cube will do. If the next one is make selectable object change color, then there's no room or time to do the next thing. Every task follows cleanly from one to the other. And if you do want to say, get a tree that does X, you have to mark it down, make a task, go do that. And that way it's not falling in as like extra time and wasted effort. It is becoming part of the process. And that accounting for each task is how you make sure people are organized. You have to actually annotate and work across different tasks, because this is getting into like really nitty gritty here and stuff too. That's also why you want to have very fast build cycles in your projects. People think it's annoying. It's more than annoying. If your project takes 5 minutes to build, what happens is as your project builds, you'll go on YouTube. You will start looking at videos, and then
Or
as
you
it
start
builds,
talking to the other developers that are in the middle of coding and distracting them and having a
distracting them too.
conversation.
Yeah,
Done it a
and the
million
thing is,
times.
and if you start doing that, for example, you're doing a build that should take 5 minutes, like literally the timer will take 5 minutes and the build will stop. You'll start a conversation with your friend beside you going, hey, have you seen that new show? And you will have a 25-minute conversation about some show. So that 5 minutes of build time actually costs the company 25 minutes. Now, again, this may seem
50
very
because there's two people.
well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it may be very clinical and analytical to look at this, but if you're genuinely talking about getting things done, you have to do that. You have to be very fair about the fact that time is money, even if it's your own time and your own money. And so if that's the case, there is a big mind shift switch between getting things done properly, like actually trying to, versus it would be nice if I was more organized, dot, dot, dot. If you just want to be kind of more organized, there are ways to do it. But if you want to project manage and actually manage the project, you have to start looking at this as, what are my time sinks? What are the things that waste time that don't need to waste time? And faster build cycles, giving yourself quick ways to test, iterating your projects, writing down actionable tasks. You don't have to think about what they're doing, planning far enough ahead, but just enough that you have each day ready. You don't have to sit and think about it. Having allotted time, so 10 minutes in the morning to plan stuff, and then you have a structured day until the end of that day. These kinds of things are like, they compound to the point that they don't just save 5 minutes here or 2 minutes there. You will be like more than 5 to 10 times more performant just because you're actively engaged in the process of getting something done. So it's there's a lot of really nuanced stuff here, but it really comes down to you have to start respecting time and project management.
So what I'm hearing is that I should have more than the one sticky on my wall that says "Make game."
Yes, good suggestion. Yeah.
Okay. Make game.
Make game, sell game. Don't forget the.
You forgot step 2.
Yeah. And step 3, retire and go to space.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the productivity of having the specific actions. It's easy to reproduce and see too if you ever just take a day and go through if you've got like a big backlog of bugs, you go through somewhere and you just take a look at those and you start knocking those out, and you know exactly what to do. You'll see how much less of that time you end up wasting, like, or how much less you get distracted, and you can just kind of like blow through them all because you know exactly what the next one is. It's like, I got that one, damn, check, and then you're going through them, getting fast assuming that they're not the kind of bug where you're stuck going for days, but you get all the low hanging ones and you start knocking those out, and you'll see that I think you get kind of in that same workflow and that same pattern.
Although the other thing too, here's another small tip as well. And again, I hate doing this, but that's kind of the point. It's the most performant, the best way to do it is there's a concept called "eat that frog." And it's the idea that it's there's always some task you don't want to do, some tediously horrible part of the process that's either like configuring Unity when it's broken, or finding some bug that's an issue for you, or going through like setting up the Android SDK stuff if it's not working, some horribly annoying, some fiddly problem you have to do, and you'll try and put that off as much as possible, and that's fine, and you'll go for the more fun, easy, low hanging fruit because it's satisfying. But what you're doing is you're not getting rid of the problem, you're pushing it down the track until when at the start of the day you have the most amount of energy and positivity to get things done. By the end of the day, you're kind of worn out and feeling like crap anyway, and then asking yourself to do the hardest task, then you're not going to do it. You're going to put it off till the next day, and it'll just keep going like that. And so what you want to do is, if there's a horrible task you don't want to do that first. Because what you'll do is, once it's done, you'll have this breath of fresh air. You'll have this hard thing done. You can now enjoy the rest of the process. On top of that, it's just by doing that harder task, what you don't realize is it's, even if you're not doing it, it's in your brain, right? It's kind of like everyone knows this. You got a report due or something, and then you go and play games or take a break and do something else. It's in the back of your head the whole time. You keep saying, you should be doing this, you should be doing this thing. And it kind of taints whatever it is you're doing. Like, it takes some of the fun out of it. It also, like, there is a portion of your brain's mental energy always focused on the thing you're not doing. And if you just do it as much as you don't want to, you get 100% of your brain power back to work on everything else you're doing. So again, I hate doing it myself, and I often don't. I often will do the fun, easy thing and distract myself and go, I have a hard project to do. Let's go do the dishes instead, because that's nice, quick, easy, and I can feel good about myself. Everyone does that. But my point is, if you are being very earnest about, like, there's money on the line, or I'm actually trying to make this for a living, or this could be my future, you have to sit back and look at yourself and ask when you're doing this as a distraction. And if you want to get it done, eat that frog.
Yeah, I would generally recommend the same. I try to do all the hardest things as early as possible. Whatever I have to do that's like the most important or the most mentally exhausting, try to knock that stuff out as early as possible, because otherwise, I'm way worse. And then it just sits on you all day, right? It's like a cloud over everything else. And once it's done, it makes everything else a lot easier too. As soon as you get whatever the hard thing is, you don't want to do that.
There's one other thing I think that might relate to folks who are anything like me, that every once in a while, it might be a good idea to delete Steam from your computer. When you everybody has that one thing that they get addicted to, that they can't stop playing, and sometimes what you need is to remove the ability to easily open up the distraction that you keep going back to, in order to force yourself to get through that frog or the series of frogs that you're done, and get back into the rhythm of things. so that you can go ahead and keep going.
I literally uninstalled Battle.net for 4 months for that exact reason.
I do the same
yeah.
thing all the time. Deleting shortcuts, uninstalling games. Yeah. As soon as it becomes a problem. Otherwise, it's too hard to just instinctively sit down and start playing. So I want to go through a couple questions somewhat quicker. So we had a ton of them come in. We had one was, is pixel art worth it? I'm not sure what worth it means, but it's a lot of work for a game. I mean, if you really want to make a pixel art game, it's worth it, I guess. But making it, I don't know that there's a lot of money in making pixel art, like as a pixel artist, but I don't really know. I don't know if you guys know anything about pixel art. What about Andrew? Any thoughts on pixel art?
I know nothing about making it. It's not my style. That I know that as a player, I'll go on my phone and look at new games, and they look really cool. But then I open up the game, like the previews, and it's all pixel art, and I'm like, no, leave. I'm not into that.
Well, it's actually something that Thomas Burstad, I think, is a very good point on this. He said that if you're doing 2D in general, it's a lot harder to source assets and stuff. You have to make them yourself. It's a lot more time consuming from an art perspective. If you're doing 3D, mostly you can get a model or pay someone to make you one, and then you have that. You don't have to make 500 variations. If you want a new attack animation, go to Mixamo. You don't have to have someone make by hand a whole new animation. So if you're new, it's probably a better option to try and go either 3D or 2.5D or something instead. Pixel art is very pretty, but I would say honestly, unless you have a dedicated artist doing stuff for you, it's probably going to be harder for you as a new game dev to get very far with that.
Yeah,
makes sense.
So, what do you think of using 360 photo panorama images developing Unity games? And do you know of any good tutorials and examples? So, what do you guys do this? I've done this a couple times in the past for VR games specifically, and in there, I thought it kind of made sense. Outside of a VR game, I'm not sure. Outside of using it for like the Skybox, what I would want to use a 360 panorama for, unless there was maybe some sort of specific game where it really made sense, like you're supposed to be standing there. But I don't know. You guys, any thoughts on this one?
I do this a lot actually. This is one of those things.
I thought you might.
Yeah, it's one of those client work things, which it actually has a lot of surprise utility. So, for example, there's actual platforms out there where you can upload a series of 360 panoramas, and it will generate a web-based player in HTML5 canvas that lets you navigate through and sort of click the screen and go to different spaces. And so, what we've done is if you've got a 360 application, say a VR application, and your client wants to be able to let people who don't have a VR headset try it, you can actually just go through your own experience and take 360 panoramas of your Unity project and then make a web version that's like a walking 360 demo of the experience. And that's a really nice value add to a client to kind of say, hey, for an extra couple thousand, we can give you a thing which is a web version of your entire application that will, let clients view through it without having to have the whole VR headset and rig and whatever. There's a lot of cases where you can save a lot of performance too, where you can build up a cool 3D experience, save the 360 image. And sometimes if we're doing a version of a project where we're migrating from a Vive version or some large PC based VR version, and people want to see it on a Google Cardboard or some variant of it, you can make a 360 panorama of the experience and then have that as the low resolution build. It's not as fun, it's not as interactive, you don't get as much stereoscopy. You do get some. People think it's just flat. It isn't. You can actually take a stereoscopic 360 panorama if you know what you're doing. But it's just not going to be as engaging, obviously, because it is still just a video. But I would say, to our surprise, there's been a lot of utility in using it as like the lighter weight version of a larger project. And so I wouldn't think of it as a panorama as a tool for Unity. I would say it's a great way of having an alternate. You can use it in Unity as a way of capturing 360 versions of your project. You know what I mean? Like it's not. I don't use it as much as part of Unity. I use it as this is a Unity build, or I can take a 360 panorama of the Unity experience as a virtual camera, and then I can make a different build that's that project in a lightweight panoramic version. And that lets you sort of double dip on the project.
Yeah, I thought you might use that a lot and have some interesting insight into that.
There's a I wish I could remember the name of it. There's some really cool web tool that the artist on my team uses that he basically uploads all the panoramas and it just makes a navigatable experience. We've used it for a few things. If I can find it before the end of the stream, I'll post.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I wish Dave was around. He built something like that too. I'm sure he'd love to just talk about that. So I was going to hit a couple more of these questions. First, though, I wanted to make sure that everybody who hasn't already hit the like button hits it. I got this shiny silver thumbs up that I need to put in the background. So I'm just like, I don't know, wear it as a hat or something so everybody remembers. But yeah, go ahead. Please hit the button if you haven't already. It does help a lot. And if you've got more questions, drop them in chat and we'll try to go through a couple more of these. And the next one was just about, did we already talk about 10x developer stuff? We didn't yet. I don't know if we're quite ready to jump into that, or you should hit a few more questions first and then we'll jump back into that. So no, just hang around and we'll get into that a little bit later. So, but hit thumbs up and be ready for it. So how do you know when you have too many managers in your game? This is an interesting and very open-ended question. I thought was kind of fun too, though. So after going through that RTS engine, it's interesting seeing how they've got everything set up, because their engine essentially, like, everything is a manager. Every different system has a manager for it that has some level of settings on it, which is but it runs into the issue of, like, customization is a little bit confusing trying to figure out where things go, but it's not actually too complicated or too bad. So I thought when I first saw it, I was gonna just dislike it because there were so many, but it actually seemed relatively reasonable after playing around with it a little bit. So with this, for me, I don't know, like, I don't know what the best way to recognize this is. Like, how do you recognize that you've got too many managers? For me, usually, like, I don't, like, go out and instinctively create managers, like just go start making managers for things that just kind of slowly start to appear to manage different systems of the game. Um, but yeah, have any thoughts on just, like, an easy way to recognize this, like a quick tip on it? I don't know.
Off the top of my head, I would think if I haven't faced this myself necessarily, I think, but when you start needing managers to manage your managers,
Manager.
yeah, I can imagine, like, managers do really good at keeping siloed information, quick and easy and efficient. But if it gets to the point where suddenly, like, oh, but now these managers need to talk to each other and do this, so I need a manager to control that and organize all that, then maybe that's when it's starting to get unruly.
When they become, like, mid-level managers, right?
Yeah, no script wants to be a mid-level manager.
You got like a hierarchy there.
Oh yeah, that's always
Go
fun.
ahead.
You got nested version of it. So again, I'm gonna be obtuse like usual and give a very kind of hard to explain answer. I used to have this problem a lot, which is, I've said before, I used to sit and really think about how to solve these problems, because to me there's an instinctive point where it feels off. Having thing manager, other thing manager, it feels icky. It feels like you're making a mistake, you're doing something wrong. And there's a lot of scenarios where I would sit down and I would literally spend hours and hours and hours drawing UML diagrams and charts and trying to come up with the ideal, hypothetical, super perfect architecture, like just the right amount of abstraction layers and everything's perfect. And I would, like, stress myself out to the point that I would be, like, genuinely physically ill trying to figure out correct answers to stuff, because I felt like this shouldn't be this complicated. There should be right answers somewhere. And I can't remember when it happened, but there was a certain point in my career where my entire philosophy of design changed. And I now find all of these questions instinctively super easy because of something very, very simple, which is, a question like that is implying that there's, like, a number, like a right number of managers or a correct system or a correct architecture. But again, this may seem like a really obvious thing, but it's really not. Like, if you sit and think about what I'm saying here, this might change your mind a lot. It completely changed mine. Is the correct amount of code in your project is the code required to do the job you're doing. In other words, the correct amount of managers is the amount of managers you need. Now, This may sound really weird, but what I mean is, rather than trying to solve the answer as some sort of like integration equation of whatever, if you only ever write code you need, I need a thing to do X, so I write exactly the code to do X, nothing more, nothing less, and you keep doing this, whenever you look at your code and say, is it too many managers? The answer is probably going to be no, because literally every one of them is being used to do something that's literally required in the project, because every line of code written contributes to the project. Now, could you refactor it and make changes? Sure. But the only time you ever have too many managers is when you start making managers for problems you don't have. If you've got one audio clip or 5 audio clips that are playing sound, and you create a manager to manage some sort of abstracted audio system, then that's one too many managers, because you're not using it. There's no value for it. So it's not about a number, it's about what it does. And so the truth is, and this comes back to what I said before, one, do you enjoy using your code? And two, is it easy to work with? And so it's really easy now for me. I don't know about everybody else, but like I've hit this moment where I realize I write code that is fun and clean, easy to work with. And if all of a sudden it stops becoming clean and easy to work with, I stop, I ask what would make it easy to work with, and I make that and just that, and I keep doing this. So if you start dragging stuff into an array and you're like, oh, this won't scale well. As soon as when I paste this 5 times to 5 more NPCs, I'll have to do this 100 times. You've established a problem. How could you make it easier? Move it all to one thing, reference the one thing, problem solved. If you solve these little problems as they come up, then you never get into this question, right? So it's again, I can't give you a direct answer. I don't know like specifically when that switch clicked in my head, but I will say philosophically that all those questions, should I use X for persistence? Should I use these managers? How many is the right number? What's the correct names for these things? Almost every single one of those questions can be answered with write code you enjoy, keep it simple. If you hit a problem, stop, evaluate why it's a problem, make something small that fixes it, and keep going. And then it's very, very hard for there to be any problems with your code, because it's going to be naturally growing in the right direction. It's I don't know if that's any help, but that's like it fundamentally changed my perception.
I think it's perfect help. I mean, the main thing there just being like not to write code you don't need, right? It's hard to resist, and people get into hard to do kind of out of that desire to make more stuff. You need to make a full system to do this thing, and a lot of time you don't. Just keeping it simple is always the correct answer. This next question's a lot easier. Any suggestions for naming a specific type of a game, like an adventure game? Naming stuff is impossible for me. So when you're naming a game, I just ask people, and then I come up with bad ideas. What about you guys? Naming an actual game. So this isn't like code naming. If we're talking about code conventions and code naming, I could get all over that. But naming the game, no. What do you got?
I named my game years ago when I first started like thinking of it. Before I got busy with the day job, I was like, I'm going to make this next game. I'm going to get the URL, The Quest Heroes, and it's going to be great. It's going to be amazing. It's kind of a vague name, The Quest and Heroes. It's exciting. It leaves it open. And then at like a year later, there was an iOS game with that exact same name. And so I still have the URL, but now I have Legend of the Stones. That was not taken, as far as I can tell, on Steam. Nobody go make a game on Steam with that name. Don't do that to me. But for me, it's just thinking like what sounds cool, and what to me, and this is very subjective. I would guess I like vague names. I like names that make you wonder, what's happening next. And for a genre specific game, a fantasy RPG, Legend of the Stones seems like, what's the Stones? And you can imagine what the art might look like on the cover box, and it's it speaks to me in the genre of the game. But all I thought was what's cool, and then I played around with a bunch of different things, looked for a URL, because to me that was important to have a website URL that worked in a game that wasn't taken by somebody else already. So
I think that's actually the secret answer. So again, here's a small hot take. Every name for everything is usually pretty stupid if you stop and think about it. Take any large brand name, Coca-Cola. Say that 10 times in your head and tell me it's not a stupid sounding series of syllables, right? But the thing is that here's the secret trick to naming anything. Once a name becomes popular because a product's popular, it suddenly becomes a good name. It doesn't matter. The names, even the dumbest names, will become good. Hollow Knight, like that's just 2 words. That doesn't mean anything. That's not a particularly valuable or interesting name. But once the game is good, the name is good. So as far as I'm concerned, your goal to name anything is one thing: make sure it's unique when people search for it. That's all the name should really do. So if you want to know how to name something, type some random words into Google and try to be the least amount of responses come back. And if you can be unique, then that's a good name. Because as soon as you do a good job of making your project good, it's now going to be easy to find. So it doesn't matter. Just pick a name that's unique.
Yeah, and I'm terrible at naming stuff, so I'm gonna hit the next question. ML API versus Mirror. I would probably recommend Mirror right now because everybody that I know uses Mirror over ML API. And I don't know the status of the API stuff, if that's going to change or what's going to happen with that. But I don't know if you guys have any other suggestions or recommendations. People in chat might also have some thoughts on that. So if you do, please just drop them in chat and answer that. You guys have any other thoughts on that? I think we're all kind of okay with using Mirror, Photon, or anything, right?
Yeah,
and also,
whatever gets the
don't
job
forget to
done.
hit thumbs up. Go ahead.
Yeah, just whatever gets the job done. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't. Again, like too much of the discussion is focused on did I pick the right tool? Well, pick a tool, use it. If it stops doing what you need, switch tools. You know.
Yeah, switch. And I think switching from those, it's generally not too difficult to switch networking setups,
The hard part is designing
depending
your
on
code
what
to
it
support
is.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Any tips on debugging in Writer? I'm having a trouble with the namespace, the editor namespace. I'm not. I don't know. This is weird. If you're having trouble with the name editor namespace in Writer, I don't know. I got nothing on this one.
I would say probably what that error is, unless I'm wrong, but I'm guessing it probably means you're trying to build your project and you've referenced something that's an editor reference in the project. I would say
Yeah.
that means in some script at the top it's saying Unity editor. If that's the case, you can't do that. You can't reference editor stuff in the build because what happens is when you build a project, it'll try to bring in the entire editor with the build, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to include the editor in your build. So if that is the error you're getting, you'll have to look into either commenting out that code or learn preprocessor directives and how they work.
Yeah.
As for debugging in Writer
Or put
specifically,
it into an editor folder if it's actually an editor
yeah.
script, because it's got the colon editor there. If it's like a custom editor and it's in one of those editor subfolders, it'll automatically only compile for the editor, or you can use that, the preprocessor, if Unity editor.
Although my guess
Around
is if it was an editor tool script, it would be in the editor folder and there wouldn't be an error. My guess is if they are getting an error, it's probably because they're referencing asset database or something in a way they shouldn't. So that's usually what that
could be
error
the
is.
case, yeah. Or they're referencing an editor script from something else outside of there.
And if you're looking for specific tips on Writer debugging, here's the thing actually, and this kind of surprised me. It was during your Wednesday meeting last week. We were talking about debugging, and it occurred to me a lot of people don't actually realize that there is breakpoints in the debugger, right? So what you can do, if you're not familiar with this, there's an option in the top right of Writer which will say attach to Unity Editor. And what that means is your editor is now going to run and be attached with the code. And so if you hit the little bug icon, there's a little green bug, you have now made a debug running build of that application that you can then listen to. And so if you put breakpoints in your code, so you'll have to look into this, but breakpoints and debug with Writer, your code will stop running when it hits that line of code. So if you're looking to debug stuff, that is extremely useful. You can put a little breakpoint on like one of the lines by hitting the red circle somewhere on one of the sides, and then anytime your code hits that line, it'll stop. And that makes it very easy. You can then inspect all of the variables.
Yep. Let's see it right now. So here I've got a Writer instance set up with an event that fires off whenever I place a building in this RTS setup. Here, let me so I'll place a building real quick. Here, let me show the other screen real quick. I'll show you what that looks like. I'll place a building and then we'll just go through and show that breakpoint. Because I do this all the time. I debug and attach and stuff and look at things whenever I'm just not sure what I'm doing or I get a little bit confused or whatever. I just want to take a look and see what the state of other people's code is. So I go in here, click, and place a building. You can see my game screen now, right? I click, bam, place, and that should have... Oh, that would have hit off my breakpoint. I'm going to go back into Writer, though.
Yeah, make sure you're in debug. Sometimes I make the mistake of running it and not running it as a debug build.
Well, I just hadn't hit F5. So now we'll go back into Writer. So now I've got the breakpoint added, and by default, if you just hit F5, it does the same attaching. It's going to auto attach to the instance that you opened up Writer with. This only if you open up Writer separately, you have to pick the project. But if you double click on a C# script in Unity to open it, then you just hit F5 once you're in, and it'll do up down here, initializing the debug. And then if I go back into Unity and place an object, so you guys can't see it, but I'm just going to go place another building, and it immediately stops right here. Jason was saying you can see a bunch of data and you can step in. So I can hit, what is it? I want to make sure I don't hit a hotkey because my hotkeys are doing something. So it's
I just pressed the blue icons there. See on the bottom bar, the step over and step ins are there.
Wait.
Yeah,
Okay. These ones. I never use these. I normally use the hotkeys F10 and F11, but I always get scared when I'm recording or on a video because it'll pop up some other random thing. Like F10 stops recording in my video, so like I get terrified to hit the hotkeys there. So if I do like a step into, which is F11, it'll actually go into the different methods. First, it's going to go into that terrain area one. Oh, it's going into getting the position. Here, I'll hit.
Yeah,
F11
you have to do a smart step into to avoid decompiling code. That's the broke bend arrow.
Yeah. Hit Shift F11 again. The other thing I can do a lot of time is I'll just go to Paint Square and I'll just add a breakpoint there and hit F5 and let it go to the next breakpoint that I want to stop at. But here you can see we got data on all of the info here. You can see the call stack here. So it went in right here. I can click through the call stack and see where it was all called. And this is all some of the stuff in the RTS engine that was kind of auto calling. So in update, it called place building and went through this whole process before it got here. And then I can see the data of my local variables and stuff too. Super, super handy. I always forget that people don't necessarily know that exists. And you can step through, keep going through all the code and run it and Shift F5 to stop. All right, let's stop sharing my screen.
Another part of that too that's quite valuable is a lot of people don't realize you can also conditionally breakpoint. So if rather than just clicking the button to make a breakpoint, if you right click, you can run a little condition on that. And a good example of this is you could say when this kill counter, if it's greater than 5, or if it hits 7, or if health gets less than 50%. And so you can actively put in a condition to say, only do this under this condition, which makes it like if you know a bug happens whenever your health gets to 10%, do a specific check so you're not going to have to breakpoint every time. It'll only breakpoint when that condition hits.
Yeah, that's a really handy one too. Here I've got the text is a little too small, but I put in a check to see if the center.x is greater than 100. So that's one of the parameters here. But yeah, I've used that a lot of the time, or finding like if the game object's name is that specific name. If you want to find a very specific game object and just stop on that one, can come in handy too. All right, let's see. We had a bunch more questions.
Oh, and one last thing, because someone mentioned it as well, is as well as debug.log, there's actually debug.break. You can literally write a line of code that says break here on this code. I don't use it very often because why do that when you can do it in the editor? But sometimes it is useful if if you specifically want to say, when you hit this line of code, breakpoint. That's an option you can do.
And a lot of the time that's because you want to go inspect a bunch of the data, the variables, and the state of stuff and see what's going on, or see what's going to happen after that. For some reason, we'll figure it out otherwise.
There's also one other one too, just as a small note. There's a bunch of, you can actually do the same thing with Unity stuff too. There's actually an ability for you to pause the editor or to stop it running. So editor application.isPlaying, if you just set that to true or false, it will start or stop the editor. So sometimes you can pause as well. So sometimes if I'm doing a test and I want to check something, like say my UI canvas isn't working correctly, I will write a line of code that will actually pause the editor when a certain line is hit. I don't want to breakpoint because that's going to check my code, but I do want to pause the editor to see the state of the objects. Say a pooling system is not working correctly and objects are not appearing, I would pause the editor so I can see the hierarchy at that exact moment prior to something happening. And then people forget this. There is a button in the top right that lets you step frame by frame. You can actually do that in Unity. That third arrow, the one on the right, lets you step frame by frame through it. So if you know something weird's about to happen, you're destroying an object and a new one should be created, you can tell the editor to pause just before the bad thing happens, and then manually step through frame by frame and see what's happening. So it's I don't need these very often, but they're there as a tool, you know.
Yeah, comes in handy when you can't figure out what's going on and something's happening too fast. So here's a question about what you would recommend as a beginner for game programming practice. So I generally recommend simple mobile games, things that have a single mechanic like Flappy Bird. Not even Angry Birds at first, Angry Birds like second. And starting with simple stuff like Flappy Birds and simple tapping games, and then slowly going up, but staying with simple mobile games in general until you feel a little bit comfortable, and then moving on. But you guys have any other just game types you recommend, or just stick with same?
VR, MMO.
VR and MMO games? Yeah.
No, I actually wonder if it makes sense as a beginner, like, especially if you are thinking, I want to make a large game, like the game I really want to make, I know is big and I shouldn't do it because I'm still learning. Would it make sense to focus on small games projects that kind of lead you in that direction, or to just say, okay, Flappy Bird is a great example of a simple game you can make, or Tetris, somebody mentioned in the chat. Even though if those have nothing to do with the game you really want to make, is it better to focus on those classic games that you know well, and so you know how to, what it needs to replicate, or to focus on, maybe smaller projects or other games that kind of lead you towards the game you want to make?
My case, I'm a nihilist, so I'll always say, kill your darlings. Go over the Stephen King quote. The truth is, whatever game's in your head is specifically inspired, most likely, by a studio or a AAA larger than yourself. And whatever dream is in your head, I'm sorry, but kill it for now. You do not have the resources to make it, and if you try to, you will end up just you'll end up with something that either isn't complete or broken, or that you'll hate, or you'll realize it's more complicated. If you don't believe me, try to just make. If you think that you can make your game, then making Snake should be trivial in comparison, right? So just make Snake, make it, and I don't mean just make Snake as like make the mechanic work. I mean from start to finish, make Snake so that it has a UI, it has sound effects, it's published on a store, it's got a scoreboard system, it's persisted, it's got all the stuff you could possibly want in a game like that. It's got custom mechanics, it's got levels of progression. Like make it a high level version of a really really simple game. And if you don't find yourself getting tripped up on just that, I would be amazed. Never mind trying to make the next big super space MMO, whatever. So I would say honestly, like you just have like I forgot who said this quote. It's really really good one though. They said that you got into whatever it is you're into. So game development. You got into game development because you've got good taste. There are things you enjoy in game development. That's why you got into it. And so you're inspired to make things like the things you like, but you don't have the skill. That's just a fact. You simply don't have the ability to make the things you want to make. And so you only get that skill through trial and error and practice and effort. And so it will take you literally thousands and thousands of hours to get to the point you can make things that you yourself would be inspired by. Now, that doesn't have to be a depressing thought. That can be a challenge. And the way you do that is you start by taking something small, making it, and then making it better. And if you can learn how to make Snake more fun than it already is, that's a good starting point. So I would say always pick the smallest thing and make it as good as you possibly can. And then that gives you everything you need to move up one level. So small, but like careful steps.
It gives you those easy wins too, because you've got a target and a goal, and you know what's going to be fun at the end. You rebuild something that's fun so that you know the end result is fun, and you don't build something, go through all the effort, and then realize it's also not fun, and you don't like it, and you kind of get let down and lose that motivation. So yeah, until you can build the thing you want, I work on the simple stuff, and yeah, small stuff like that. I would just look at mobile games, look at things that have a single mechanic at first. There's only one thing that you do, not like it's got an inventory system and upgrades and all this other crap. Super simple, one mechanic game, and then start to build up from there. As a general recommendation. There was a question about what makes a game. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, because there's just so many levels to that too, right? Like you make a very good point about making your game is one step. Making it fun is a whole other step. Making it interesting enough that people might want to download it is a whole other step. dealing with bugs and issues that players will inevitably find is a whole other step. There's stuff that you're not even considering in terms of marketing, or in terms of level design, or in terms of style or UI design, or dealing with cross-platform support. There's going to be a million things that crop up that make this harder, more complicated, and require skills you don't have. And if you keep hitting these, they're just going to become more and more depressing, to the point that you end up hating your own project. But if you at least start small, the amount of effort required to learn how to add Steam integration to your Snake game is going to be considerably less than adding Steam integration to your giant multi-platform MMO, right? So at least if you learn these things in a smaller setting, you can apply them later on to bigger projects. So I'm not saying never make your dream game, but you should already feel like making your dream game is 80% possible before you start. But if you start now, you'll keep coming across new chasms. It's like trying to climb a mountain and a new mountain appears every 15 steps, or it gets taller. That's going to like ruin whatever motivation you have. You need to pick something where you understand the scope of the problem, or it's smaller than you think it is, because it will grow anyway, you know?
Yeah, even the small projects end up taking up more as soon as you start adding in everything else. And I mean, and one of those things like this question kind of dives into was what makes a game good, or what make for you guys, what makes a good game. Like, and I think that one of the things, if you try to build your own stuff, like you kind of mentioned, we just talked about, was you're not going to have something that's fun to play and interesting. And for me, what makes a game good is that it's got like a fun, addicting play loop, or it's got interactions with other players that I have fun with, and that's pretty much it. It's got to have just like an interesting, tight play loop where I can get better at it and use skill to kind of like improve at it. Or I guess the other alternative is a few games will catch me with a really good story. So I have like a really good narrative and just good storytelling, and those are pretty much the two things that make a good game for me. It's being able to level up through skill, or having that engagement through a story or something. I used to really like games where I could grind on stuff a lot too, but less so now. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like building things in general, and in a game similar. I mean, sure, SimCity was always the thing when I was younger. Civilization is my addictive game that I get addicted to. But RPGs where I'm building a character, or building a party, those always speak to me. I think I've talked before about playing games and then never actually finishing them because I want to start over again with a new party and build a new party before I even get halfway through the game. So for me, it's about interesting combinations of things. Whatever the game presents, it's a puzzle, and I can put it together in different ways to optimize it and come with a better or different outcome. And that's I'm taking away all the other stuff, whether it's a RPG or civilization. Essentially, it's you're given a bunch of blocks, and your job is to make something, a castle. I mean, Minecraft is a great example. You're literally given blocks and told to make stuff, and that's why people love it. And so that's what drives me. And so when I'm making a game, it's challenging because it's different to make a game that you like than to find a game that you like, I think. And so part of it is playing your own game and making sure you're not bored. And that is I think a key thing for me. Whenever I'm making a project, whether it's a small one or a bigger one, if I'm getting bored playing it, then it might not be fun.
Yeah, in my case, I would say it's not even a specific type or style of game. It's the three designs, which unfortunately are the three hardest things to do in game development. It is game design, level design, and sound design. They're the three markers for me of quality for a game. And to be more specific about this, it's the idea that you could be the world's best programmer or the world's best artist, and if you make a game that's gorgeous and has, well written code, but there's no fun gameplay loop, it's crap. Like no one cares. Like you're not. It's just a. It could just be a video. It doesn't really matter that it's a game. So I think what a lot of people miss is the hardest part of game development is to make your game something people want to play. And that is actually the design phase. And so for me, what makes a game good is, do I want to play it? And how do I want to play it? Well, is it designed well? And that's really, really hard to learn how to do. It's a whole different set of skills. It's learning how to design systemic loops, how to manage player engagement. It's learning how to structure a level so that you give just the right amount of affordances that people know what they're doing but never feel like they're being dragged along. It's very, very hard to make a good game. People can make a game, but learning how to make a game that actually just clicks with people, like everybody knows some games just immediately click with them, and like it's hard to tell why. You could have two nearly identical platformers, but there's a reason why a lot of clone games just don't feel right. It's not because they haven't got the mechanics down, it's because they're missing what the actual core design was, the thing that made it good. So for me, it's design. It's like I can tell when a game has thought put into it. It's the same with like movie directing. For example, I was talking to somebody, we were watching some really bad TV show. I think it was called Island. It's just really bad. It's just very, very bad show. It's on Netflix recently. But what I was pointing out is even though the show is terrible, there's the person who's doing the directing at least knows their job, because there's subtle things they're doing. Like, for example, if you've got two people talking, one person standing up and one person sitting down, uh, when you're talking to the person who's standing up, you tilt the camera up, so the camera's coming from a low angle, so it makes the person look taller and domineering. But when you're talking to the other person, you don't point the camera down, because in general it makes people look small and it looks awkward on camera, so the camera faces them head on. So there was two side by side shots, and even though you don't register it unless you're paying attention to the way the video editing is done, it goes from a straight on shot to a pointed up shot as opposed to up and down. So there's like little directorial things, cool to shop effect stuff. I won't get into the whole video editing as a whole topic, but my point is there's hallmarkers in design that shows people know what they're doing. Is there line of sight points of interest? Is there affordances in the right places? Are they using color theory to indicate what's poisonous versus not? There's little indicators to tell me from a design perspective that they are trying to lead me in a direction for a good experience. And that to me is the marker. Same with audio. Like, is the audio just there because there's a fight scene to put fight dramatic music, or are they using the audio to do something? Is the audio building tension? Like, is there a big empty hallway, and does the music build as I walk the hallway? Are they trying to build anticipation? Did they design a space so there's a long hallway before a fight scene so that I feel tension as I go towards it? Are they, if they're giving me a reward or something, does the level design spiral upwards to imply progress as I go? Or if a place is meant to be dark and domineering, does the level design spiral downwards to indicate that the place is getting deeper and darker into a pit? That's why all these games that are like Doom style, they always have you going further and further, deeper and deeper. And all these games that are about achievement, like Celeste, always have you going up and slowly and whatever. So in general, like I can't point to one thing because I'll play any game that's good. So I guess the point is, if it's does it feel like the game is crafted with attention and care? And for me, that's the design phase. It doesn't matter how good you are at code or art or all that stuff. It's, are you actually, like, does this deserve to be a game, or could it just be a movie, or could it just be a good story? You know, there are some games out there that are great stories, but they're painful to play, or the other way around. You know.
All right, we've got tons and tons of questions. So this one I hit real quick. Any chance the Discord could get some love with roles levels? Yeah, we'll do somebody in there to kind of manage that stuff more full time too. It's not something I really have a lot of time for. And then Ultimate Bundle was great, but it mentioned a free mug with the course. The mug stuff, just for anybody that got in on that, I'm still just waiting on the final test on it, and then I'll be sending out the info for people to redeem them. So if you signed up for that and got into that, I'll send that out soon. I just need to make sure that it's perfect before it actually goes out. But it'll be an email about that soon. And then Discord, I want to figure something out and get somebody in there to kind of manage things somewhat permanently and keep things perfect. So I'll jump into that soon. I'm making a dungeon/RTS. Oh, wait. This was not the question I meant to click on. This was the question right below. Sorry, one below. So when should I make a state machine behavior versus normal mono behaviors when making enemies or bosses? So I thought this was kind of this. The question here is more like, when should I like just make some simple code on my bosses or NPCs versus actually building out a full state machine type system? And I think that your answer previously kind of hit on this stuff, which is when it gets difficult with the simple solution. So if you're simple NPs without a state machine, it's easy to manage and you don't have to modify it. You don't have to go in and add in a bunch of if statements every time you want to change something because the NPC is simple enough, then leave it that way. If that gets to be a pain and problematic, then a state machine is one of the many good ways to solve that problem.
And a small note on that too, just when it comes to managers, I think a mistake a lot of people don't realize too is you can kind of cheat this a little bit. So, for example, take audio. Some people look at audio and go, I either have to put an audio clip in my script or I need to build an audio manager. So I either have to do the really, really quick one or the really convoluted build a giant system solution. Well, what I do is I just do the very basics, which is if I have an audio clip, I put it in the file. But if I know the audio is going to change, say I've got test audio from a client and they're going to give you real audio later, I'll make a script called Audio Manager, and I'll have a function called get clip, and I'll type in the name of the clip. But then I'll just return that one from that file dragged in from an inspector. So I've made a quote unquote manager, but it's not a real manager. It doesn't do any of the magic managerial stuff. All it does is it moves one layer of abstraction. So now every script in the project uses the quote unquote audio manager when the audio manager is just handing it the exact files it needs. But it does it in a way that if I do decide to build an audio manager, there's one place to do it. So I would say when it comes to changing between the quick and the dirty solution, you can put hooks in place early. That's what I do is I look for something that's going to change and I put a hook in to support that change later to make my life easier. I don't build it now because I don't need it now, but I will put the hook in place so there is one place to build it when the time comes.
In that example, you're kind of starting with like an audio repository, right? There's no functionality. Like it could just be a scriptable object at first before you extend it out to do more stuff. And you can do that with any kind of data and swap them out. So it's another great solution.
The difference is rather than using an audio clip, I'd say get by name. Get me rather than saying this is the fire sound, I'd say get fire sound. That way, when I change the fire sound, there's one place to do it. It's exactly. It's just a repository.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. An easy way to do that. So should we build a game engine? I want to click on this one. No, probably not. Unless you want to be an engine developer and that's like your goal is you want to build game engines, then no. If you want to build game engines, then yes. I mean, it's a fun project. It's a fun thing to work on as like an academic thing and a learning project. But if you want to do it for productivity, it's very unlikely. It's much more of a learning thing or I want to be an engine developer. Outside of that, I would generally not, though.
My short answer to that is if you're asking, I want to make a salad, should I build a farm? No, you build a salad. If you want to build a farm, but you don't build a farm if you want to make a salad, right?
Yeah, just if you want to make farms. So are code quality tools a thing in the Unity world? Are there any you would recommend? I don't know if there are any that I use now. I can't think of anything that I'm personally using.
If you're thinking about things like style cop and whatever, honestly, I don't even use those in enterprise. I just don't think they're that valuable. Your code editor does 90% of the work for you these days. And I traditionally try to follow conventions where possible. So I just use whatever. Like, there's a few things I change from personal preferences. Like, I like screaming caps for consts, and Ryder disagrees with me. So I have to keep beating Ryder into shape and say, no, I am going to use my screaming caps for my constants. But no, there's no particular one I'd recommend. I would say though, a lot of what you're looking for, you will find if you use Ryder. Ryder will help you with a lot of the so-called code quality stuff. There's also plugins like Code Complexity plugin I use a lot, and that tells me the cyclomatic complexity of the scripts I'm using and helps me get to the right answers on things. But there's not like a specific tool that I would recommend.
Ryder is definitely one that we should recommend it though. Yeah, that you mentioned there. Ryder is one of the few that it does a pretty good job of it, and I just use it by default as not an external tool or not an additional tool. Already using it for code editing, so the benefits that I get out of there are pretty nice and free. And then somebody was asking about the Clean Code book by Robert C. Martin. Yeah, that's the one. And then another person was asking if it's worth writing a book on game development. I don't know. I would email Robert Nystrom. He did a book on game design patterns. Ask him. I would check him. Oh, there's the Clean Code book. So yeah, I don't know the worth it. I mean, the worth it part depends on what the benefit is. If it's financially worth it, I have no idea. If it's like if you want to get a game development job and you've written a book on game development, it's going to be dramatically easier to get a job almost anywhere. So there's some benefits for sure. I have no idea on the financials of books, though. I've heard good and bad things from different people who've written different software books. Some loved it and some hated it. And then you don't have any thoughts on books or writing, do you? Either of you guys?
I mean, I thought about it a few times, but I know this is one of those weird problems. But I have so much work, I'm keeping busy, and I can't justify it to the point where, like, you don't do it for the love of it. If you're writing a book, like I love programming, I'll talk about it every day. That's not a problem for me. But if I'm writing a book, I'm doing it because I either think there's a missing gap in the market that needs to exist, or I'm doing it to make money. And right now, I'm already making money, and I don't. There's no gap that I'm aware of right now that I want to fill with a book. So maybe someday. I don't know what the market's like in terms of how much it's worth. I would say though, personally, I'm dubious of random books. I don't tend to download random PDFs from people because there's just so much content out there. Anybody can write a book. You've no idea who they are, what their credentials are, what experience they have. I tend to instead look at blogs and find people who are writing stuff that I like. And if I end up liking a person's style or the way they talk about stuff or their approach, they have now earned my trust as a creator. And then I would buy whatever PDF they would sell or whatever book they'd make. But I often find if you make a book on spec, nobody knows who you are or why they should listen to you. So I would say a book is kind of something that you have to earn the right to have a good sales pitch on. I could be wrong. Like I know myself, I don't tend to pick up books unless I know the author already, as a programmer at least.
It probably does work really well though as a interview and resume thing, right? If you got like wrote this book on this thing that you want to hire me for, I'm sure it gets you lots of interviews in the door a lot easier. So
Yeah,
you do
and I
have
have heard
that benefit if that's something you're interested in.
And I have heard from a few people I know who are authors that there is actually a little hack you can do that you can get into the Amazon recommendation read list surprisingly easy. Like it kind of like unlike say something like Steam, where they've got tons of games released on a regular basis, and getting into the recommendation list requires a whole pile of effort in advance. Apparently, with a little bit of effort, because the numbers of self-published books are small in comparison, and the categories are quite niche. Getting to the top of a category on the Amazon recommendation list is actually pretty easy if you know what you're doing. You have to do some research and figure out the right metrics and things to do. But apparently, if you build a community, push it at the right time, get enough stuff going, it's easier than most other things. So you can call yourself a Amazon awarded or recommended author or something pretty quickly if that is your goal academically. But doesn't interest me at the moment.
No, it's a good idea though. I mean, or a route to go. So we're getting so many messages now that like the some of the old questions have already scrolled off and I can't even click them. But the question about what source control you recommend working with in Unity, I would say for single solo projects, I just use Collaborate because it's simple and it works okay. For anything with a team, I generally prefer to use Git unless they have their own option, their own preference, like they want to use Perforce or SVN or something else, then I'll go. But I usually go for Git, and I know Plastic is picking up. I haven't used it lately enough though to personally recommend it. I don't know if you guys have, or if you guys have any differences on opinion there.
Whatever works.
Yeah. And then a question about somebody who's a game developer working in Pakistan but having a hard time with opportunities and looking to switch to ASP.NET or React Native. I want to know your advice. I don't really know personally. I only wanted to pop this one up because I've talked to a couple friends this week who are doing some web stuff using C#, ASP.NET Core, and React on top of that for their UI. So, I mean, I know that it's popular and there's a lot of development opportunity out there, but I'd also look at possible enterprise development in Unity stuff too. If you already have a bit of Unity experience, might be some options there to do some just enterprise development stuff in the engine without having to switch over. But I'd say that C#, ASP.NET Core, and React seem to be popular, at least from the few web developers that I talked to recently. I don't know if you guys, Jason, you doing any of this web, the React or any of that stuff lately?
I was more of an Angular back in my day, but yeah, I know of React. I've used a little bit, but I haven't. Let's just say I could write an entire app using Angular. Right now, I would have to do some research to write an entire app in React. But I do use ASP.NET a lot. As for saying should you switch or not, again, maybe it's because I'm a nihilist, but I would say always this building tools that will give you jobs for life is always a good idea. And honestly, ASP.NET and React will mean you will always have a job. There'll always be some website somewhere that needs help, and you'll be able to work on it. It's very, very hard to be an out of work web developer these days. Like if you know enough code, there's a new startup every week who wants some new project that you can work on. So I would say if you get those skills under your belt, you now have the resources to take your time and learn game stuff later. I would honestly, I tell most people to do that. Get a sustainable set of skills first.
Well, and your C# skills that are going to overlap too. So as you get better in one, you'll be getting better in the other at the same time. You're going to be learning them both and getting better. And it says it's already working as a game developer. So it seems like there'd be some opportunity to just kind of bounce back and forth too. Is there a good idea to write scripts? I think there was a question related to this up above that scrolled off, but is there a good idea to write your own scripts for animated characters from scratch, or use the built-in animator controllers? Here I would say generally use the animator controllers until you hit a problem, until you have a real solid reason that you can't solve. Stay with the animator controllers. They're there to do exactly that and solve that problem. So that's what I would recommend. I know sometimes people write custom ones because they saw a video or they have a specific reason that they've got. Like I've had games where, we needed to have different control over the animator, where it would be really hacky to do it with the animator controller. But that's 1 out of 20 projects, or 2 out of 20 projects that I can think of. I'm gonna scroll down here real quick and say thanks, Paul. I just saw a super chat pop up. Awesome. Glad to hear you're loving it. And then I'll scroll back up and see if we can grab a couple more questions. Unless you had something else on that last one.
Keeping it simple makes sense. The simplest way. So.
Oh, here's one for Andrew, because I haven't haven't been able to bug him on stuff. So, any tips for working with a 3D artist who's very good with Maya and Blender but doesn't know Unity?
Yeah, that's so. I guess you're gonna have to learn a little bit of Maya and Blender terms and terminology, and they're gonna have to learn a little bit of Unity terminology, because there's going to be some thing about Unity or exporting to Unity that Maya has to do. I think one of the things that was common, I don't know how common it is now, but is the scaling, for instance. I think Maya scales differently than Unity. So by default, when you bring a Maya export into Unity, it's either really tiny or really tall, and you have to scale it by 100 to make it look normal. That's solvable in the export, my understanding is, but some artists need to learn that. And so I guess in general, Google is your friend here, and work together to Google what the solutions are. There's definitely solutions. Obviously, you can, anything from Maya and Blender works great in Unity, but they have to be exported properly, and then they have to be imported properly and whatnot.
I'd also say, just as a tip, like have a look at the recommendation. Like there's some research out there you can do where you can find the exact numbers of recommended try counts, recommended complexity for models. There's like a nice little grid on one of the documentation web pages. I don't remember exactly which page it is, but there's like performance optimization for 3D models or something, and there's literally aim for this size, this amount of transparency, these different things, and then use that as a good reference point. You'll often find there's a big disconnect between an artist who wants to make something look as pretty as possible and a game that wants to draw it. So make sure that you're aware of the differences between the two. And so, yeah.
And set the pivot, like somebody mentioned down below. Tiny
helper. Yes. Oh, please do that.
Yeah, the pivot is always wrong the first time.
If you're building like a level, like an actual space, do not have a center pivot for every fucking object in your scene, please. There's nothing worse than when a modeler gives you a level and then you click on like a crate and then the pivot point is a million miles in that direction at the center of the entire root of the object, and it's like, I'm trying to move this, so I have to now parent this under another object just to move it. Make your objects have their own pivot points, please.
Yes, that's that's the one that catches me all the time. So, any thoughts on using an audio system that spawns empty audio sources from a pool versus actually attaching them to the game objects? So, what do you generally do that? Do you prefer that to just like make an audio pool that spawns up an audio, or maybe has like a pool of 30 audio sources and then just moves them, attaches them, and plays a sound versus just having an audio source on
So,
each thing?
well, I guess my problem is ever since I started using Fmod, it's dwarfed every other audio solution possible in Unity. It's just so much better than everything, except maybe Wise, but they're about comparable. So what I do now is, again, I don't like to over-engineer if I don't have to, but if a project is going to get bigger, there's a very good chance at some stage I'll switch to Fmod. So at least by moving it to some sort of external manager and having it spawn audio sources means when I do switch to something like Fmod, there's one place, one location, and one way to do it. If I use audio sources, I have to go back and like completely regut and change the whole project. So if it's a small project, I will use audio sources on the objects. If there's even an outside chance that this is going to get to the point that we will hire a sound designer, then I will make sure to give myself the easiest path to migrate to that solution. So in average, I will use an audio manager thing.
Okay, that makes sense, especially if you're going to be switching out like that. Here was a question about random loot. I thought this was an easy kind of semi-technical one we could answer. It says, I have a question about random loot. I want a specific monster to have a chance to drop a random amount of gold and some types of items, like basically a loot table. But there's also a chance of nothing dropping. And I think they're just wondering how to make that happen. So, I mean, at the top level, setting up a loot table in a game is relatively simple, right? You create a list of entries that are, a set of the entry could be a set of objects and a percent chance, or a set of money and a percent chance, or some other data type in there, and then you need to randomly roll. So when you give them I guess first off, when you're doing a loot roll, the way that it usually works is you figure out your percentages somehow in the math. I guess you got to write out the code. It's a lot easier to just write out the code for me, but you'll want to add up a lot of time to give them a value, like a minimum roll and a maximum roll, and then roll a random number between 1 and 100, and then pick the one in there. I'm doing a terrible job of explaining how to build a fucking loot system here and how to roll it. But for the chance of nothing dropping, I would just have an entry that had nothing in it, essentially, or just either that or a minimum roll that had nothing in it, or a chance to have nothing in there. But my explanation of how to build a loot system without showing code does not work well at all. What do you got, Jason? Andrew, what you guys both built some of these lately?
Yeah.
Well, in short, it's like it's just, as far as I'm concerned, it's just to put it very simply. If I've got a bucket with 10 slots in it, and I put 8 of the same object and 2 of a different object, and I just randomly pick one, I'm most likely to get the one that there's 8 of in the box. And so, 80%. As a general rule, exactly. So, as a general rule, a loot table is just you're filling a box, and how much of each thing do you put in the box? And so the likelihoods show up based on those numbers. And so all you do is you build a table where the total aggregates for a chance of something happening is weighted the way you want it to happen. And that's just a matter of having effectively like multiplier numbers across each item. So there's a million ways to do it. You can literally type, and the term is specific, by the way, loot table, as Jason described, is literally the name for it. Like that's what you call what you're looking for. So if you Google loot table, Unity, loot table, C#, you'll find a million different examples. There's not like one right way to do it, but the rules are pretty much the same every time. It is a thing. It is a probability. You roll for something, you get something back with a probability. And then you can go and look up different probability sheets for different things and how to make it better. But at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of numbers in a box with a bunch of named things, and you get back a named thing.
There's so many ways to solve that problem. I mean, with so many things, there's a billion ways to solve it. And I think one consideration, something just to think about, is the various things that may affect the outcome. For instance, on the filling in, like just if an empty list or an array of potential outcomes, and like Jason said, put 8 of one object and 2 of another, and you're going to get the one with 8 4 times as often as you're going to get the other one. But let's say that you want the chance for a better weapon to show up because of a stat the player has, right? And then you want to do a roll on that first, and then so now you can't really do just a simple list because you now need to organize things. So whatever your solution is, think first about how you want that to play out in the logic of the game. For instance, the questioner asked about there's a chance to drop nothing. Now, is that a separate rule? Is that saying, okay, hey, there's a 10% chance nothing will happen. So first do a random 1 through 10. If it's 1, nothing happens. But is that chance itself modifiable, by some stat or some external thing? It gets into a rabbit hole, but these are the things that when you're designing this from scratch, you got to consider before you start, because how you solve this is going to depend on really the logic you want and the system you want for your game.
And you bring up a good point too. So without getting into too much detail here, what you're describing is literally called a rule engine. And this is effectively, there are rules which stack and change and augment different things, and the rules themselves change over time. And I would say something that this is a whole different conversation than how do you do it from why you should do it or what you should do. But the reason why a rule engine is important is because from a game design perspective, it's not as straightforward as pick random, if random.value greater than 0.5 do X. If you do that, what happens is you will get the same thing multiple times. You will get things that feel unfair to the player. You'll have all of these weird side effects that don't feel right. If you look at how actually big games do it, it's a lot more complicated than you think, because what happens is if you're rolling for a rare item and you don't get it, the chance that rare item will appear increases every time until it eventually is a guarantee, because they want to ensure that the game feels good to play. So those drops aren't just a number chance. They actually do things like the drop rates are proportional to how valuable they are in the game, and sometimes they'll change them based on where you are or what your level is, as well as those extra stats based on the player. So as a general rule, these things get particularly complicated from a game design perspective, and you want to give yourself the best possible tools to do that. So the way to do that in general is to just have some resolver. So have something called a loot getter, and you give that to all of your entities and then say roll for loot. You pass in the entity name, or whatever it is that you're generating from, and you let it pick something. And that way some other system can set the rules, such as if they've been playing for 3 hours, automatically set that the next thing they're going to get is going to be the special sword that they wouldn't have gotten up to this point. You can override those rules in real time, because it shouldn't just be a straightforward if X position do Y, because you'll find that won't make the game feel good. But there's a whole different conversation on how to do that. You can do there's like Game of Sutra articles on this and various different things on how to make a satisfying feeling loot system. But suffice it to say, you want it to be passed off to something else. You do want some system that will decide whether loot should be dropped and how much and what, because those things are, you're going to want to tweak those values from a design perspective considerably more than just the simple levels of numbers going up and down.
Yeah, I feel like I want to do a video on loot tables now because it's a fun one, but it's relatively easy to do. But I can't talk it out. Like I can visualize it, I can see it in my head, I can see the inspector and everything else. But talking it's like stumbly. It's tough. So here was a question just on back into regular code. Is it bad to use events for normal classes because you don't have methods like on disable to unsubscribe? The answer is no, because you do have a destructor to unsubscribe if you need to. You can actually, just like you have a constructor in your C# classes, you can have a destructor that will get called when the object's destroyed. It's just like the constructor, but shift and the key next to one, whatever the heck that little squiggle thing is. And then the method name give you the same kind of functionality. And usually there's somewhere else though, like the on disable of the thing that you registered that for, or the thing that you created, and you could unregister those events as well. But no, you use events and everything, or not everything, but any kind of code. Go ahead.
Although in my case, I would say I don't use the destructor very often, just because I find it is tilde. That's the symbol, because I think it confuses people who don't know it. So as weird as it is, it may seem more complicated, but I use the iDisposable option, because if you mark a script as
Okay.
iDisposable, it gives you a dedicated dispose function, which will then unsubscribe events in there. That being said, if I'm using a normal script in Unity that's like an ability or a weapon or something, as I've said before, I don't make those in Unity. I make a separate weapon script in C# or something, and I would use that. I will actually make an attach and detach or an equip and unequip function. And even though it's not automated, I would rather have my own scripts that manage the life cycle of the presumption of this is added, this is removed. In the same way that Unity has those automated functions, I'll make my own, and then I'll make some manager that would, whenever I hand in a new weapon, if a weapon exists, unequip, assign the new one. If weapon exists, equip, and then it manages itself beyond that point. So I would always just have my own begun and end, start, stop, equip, unequip, and I would then always manage that myself.
Yeah, so speaking of the external assemblies, this one pops up. So you're talking about doing things outside of Unity and in C#. Here they've got a problem where they got multiple assets using different namespaces, just that, which is probably not an issue. But the other primary issue probably being that some are using assemblies and getting them to reference each other right. Is there a good way to get them working together? The simplest way to get them working together, if you're not worried about this long term and you don't really care, just throw them all like into a plugins folder. Almost always just resolve the issue, remove the assembly definitions, pop them in there, do it in a copy of the project, make sure that it actually works first though, because it may not work, may end up blowing everything up and breaking things, but most of the time enough to work because the references are, as long as they're not colliding, and it's just an issue. Other than that, though, interested in it, I'd actually spend some time just understanding and learning how the assembly definitions work and how they top down level, where each thing can only reference things below it. You can't do circular references. It's kind of the key thing to remember with assembly definitions and references and just external products at all, or external DLLs. I don't know if there's any specific other tips or advice that you'd give on when people get stuck with this, or they're just not sure what to do, what to look into.
So it probably isn't super helpful, but I would say assembly definitions and the way Unity handles it is a slightly more complicated and convoluted wrapper around dynamically linked libraries. That's what they are. They're just a way for Unity to do DLLs. And so the truth is, if you're having issues with them, it's because you don't understand how they work. And the best way to understand how they work is to simplify it as much as possible. So Google classes, class libraries, DLLs, how to make class libraries, how to do DLL, various different things, and just figure out in a very simple project with 3 simple classes in a basic writer project, got nothing to do with Unity, and just can you understand the relationship between references and adding references between DLLs? Once you understand that and you start to understand the flow of control, the rest of it becomes easier. So I again, I came from that side into Unity, so I found it easier to adapt to. But I notice a lot of the problems people have is they just like you drop in an assembly definition and then sort of nothing works. I'm confused. Why not? Well, as for why not, that's a bigger question. That's because that's how dynamic linked libraries work. And I can't, it's very hard to solve that problem until you know what the actual problem is. So I would say go back to basics.
Yeah, or just with the simple project there. I like that. Either outside of Unity or even a simple one, making your own assembly definitions and go through the tutorial step by step until you really understand how the referencing is actually working. So, is it important to learn how to develop shaders? I would say not necessarily. I mean, it depends. If your game really needs a lot of shader work for it to be successful, the type of game that you need actually needs a decent amount of custom shader work, then it might be. But in general, most of the stuff that you need for shader work, you could probably buy off of the asset store. It's not a bad thing to learn. There's definitely some benefits there, but it's not gonna. I wouldn't say it's important, maybe mandatory, definitely not. Right? I guess
Especially with Shader Graph. 99% of the stuff you would need, you can figure out how to do with Shader Graph considerably easier. Like if you're an artist, I know many artists who can't code at all, like literally can't write basic if statements, but they can write shaders because they're using shader graph. Because once you understand the logic of how rendering works, it's basically like drop a noise texture, scroll the noise texture, apply the noise texture onto something. You can figure out how to split apart and change the channels, the albedo or the specular or whatever, pretty easy if you understand that the kind of the universe that is shaders and textures. And artists tend to know that better than programmers do. So I would say, as far as actually shader languages, you only need that if you're writing your own stuff in different engines. If you're using something like Unity, just use shader graph. It'll make your life a lot easier. It'll do everything you'll need it to.
Question about books. Given the amount of content that's out there in video format and just online, in the visual nature of game development, do you find books are still useful in this field? And I don't know about you guys, but I do to some degree, but I still don't read books that often. I mostly use audiobooks, so that I can kind of listen through and absorb the stuff, and I'll usually listen to them 2 or 3 times, just to kind of curious though, do you guys find physical, like actual reading the books as useful? I like PDFs now, video and audio books as my primary source.
My first foray into Unity was with a book I bought from Barnes & Noble, and I was going through it page by page, chapter by chapter, setting up a 3D game, and then there was a bug in the code, and I wasn't skilled enough to debug it, basically, and I had to stop, and then I found an online tutorial that was far better. So for that regard, I would not go with a book at all. If you're learning how to like how to use Unity, how to code in Unity, how to make a project. But Jason talks about all the Clean Code book and all these other books that are more of, it sounds like it's more of oh shoot, what's the word? It's not about it's about the techniques and I'm forgetting the word, but the theories behind the code rather than the nuts and bolts of this is A, B, C. It's more about the theories, and I think that sounds like something that reading makes a lot of sense for, and books would work for.
So I, as people know, regularly reach to my back shelf and pull out a book like I did earlier. I even have here others like Mythical Man Month and a few others that are sort of sitting here on my desk. I've got Nature of Code, just tons of books. But here's the dirty secret. I actually don't really read those books very often, because I use them as reference for people. Because what I tend to do is I'll read them on something like this. That's the Remarkable tablet. It's just lets me read PDFs. Very easy to have. I can have thousands of books on here. It's easy. It's light. It's easy to work with. So I don't usually read the physical books. I tend to buy the physical books as sort of a respect for the authors, because let's just say when I find the PDFs, they're not always of a legal source. It's not my fault. Sometimes you try to buy them in Ireland, you can't. So I'll have to buy the physical book, and then I feel okay about how I acquire a PDF. But I would say though, as much as I do read a lot of books, as in these kinds of books, for every book I've read, I've probably watched 1,000 hours of video on top of that. So I would actually say my personal style of education has been mostly video content. There's about 50 programming books that everyone everywhere recommends, and of those, there's at least 6. There's at least 6 books every single programmer should read, and Clean Code being probably top of that list as just a general good bit of advice. But again, I will be honest and say most of my content is video content. This helps because I've spent the last 15 years getting slightly faster with my watching videos, to the point that I genuinely, unironically, watch videos at 3 times speed. And it's not that hard for me to do anymore. Like, it used to be crazy as an idea when I first started, but I read something a long time ago about if you increment the percentage by 10% every so often over time, you eventually get to the point it doesn't bother you anymore. So now I comfortably can watch stuff. Yeah, I can watch stuff now at 3x speed, and so you can imagine I can get through hundreds of hours of content in a fraction of the time. So that's what I tend to do these days. I do prefer video content over books, but the way I approach it is probably different. I've said this before. I will I'll watch a video, like a tutorial on Udemy or something, I'll watch the entire thing through at 3 times speed from start to finish, with hands off the keyboard, just watching it like a TV show. And then I will stop. I will make note of the areas that were new or confusing or interesting, and I will now go back and watch it at 1.5 speed with my editor open, and I'll follow along. And so I'll actually watch it twice because I can afford to do that when I'm watching it 3 times faster. So it's not about skipping the content or racing through it. It's about knowing the difference between getting an overview and then finding the bits that you actually want to dive into, and then diving into those parts separately.
Knowing what's coming, so you can be prepared to absorb it. Makes a lot of sense. And I'm the same way with video and audio and everything. I gotta speed it up. It drives my wife nuts because everything is on at least like 1.5, just like a regular YouTube video. She's like, why do they sound so weird? Like, I can't say it. When people talk slow, it drives me nuts on there. So let's see. There are a couple other quick questions, and then I wanted to get into a little bit of rant time. So any advice on staying motivated in the ultimate course when content's coming 5 times faster than I consume it? Not really. Just don't worry too much about it and go at whatever speed works for you and just start absorbing. Make sure that you're absorbing it. That's pretty much it. I wouldn't worry too much about it. Be around to answer questions and stuff the whole time. So if it takes longer, it takes longer. There were a couple more down below, and then I wanted to get into this discussion about the 10x developer stuff, because I think that's an interesting, what a lot of people are here kind of curious about. So make sure that if you haven't already hit the thumbs up button and subscribed and all that and shared, that you do that before we jump into that topic, I guess. But first, can you write off the books as a developer? That probably depends a lot on where you are, right? You'd have to ask whoever is the tax professional.
Hey, if I can write off thousands of dollars of headphones, you can write off books, I assure you.
Yeah, I'll always disclaim these that this is not tax advice, but where I am, yes.
I just asked the tax. I never know. So, but I would assume so.
I actually, that's one of my best bits of advice in general. Is if you are in a situation where you're self-employed or you're working on Unity projects with the goal of making it a business, register yourself as a business. Wherever you are in the world, you can register as a sole trader pretty easily, and it probably costs you a couple $100 to do so. And just the act of doing that will give you a VAT number. You can now use your VAT number with all purchases, and you can be exempt from an awful lot of VAT. It's just one of those things that's very, very useful if you're buying. Like, I'll put it this way: I don't pay VAT on my Unity assets that I buy in the asset store. Obviously, I do insofar as it's tax credits and all this stuff. Like, my point is, I put my VAT number in, and the cost for me at purchase time is cheaper. So stuff like this is a very small thing, but it adds up, right? You save a lot when your 15% or 12% extra is not being taken from you every time you make purchases,
Yeah, definitely look into it. Talk to somebody wherever you are about the taxes and stuff, and see what stuff qualify for. If you're buying a lot of stuff, it can definitely make sense. So what are some dedicated server costs in the cloud like PlayFab that are often not thought about? There's obvious stuff like hourly, like server fees, right? So, and bandwidth, but what else is there? So there, I'm trying to think of the primary stuff. There's all of the stuff for your data, right? You're going to have to deal with databases, backups, and maintenance on all that stuff, which is something that's not usually a huge part, but it's something you got to consider. And licensing costs. If you go with PlayFab, you've got their pricing model pretty clear on their page, or maybe you have to contact them. I can't remember now. But if you go with something like, I think we were talking about Oracle. I was talking with friends about Oracle at least last week, and like, you're covering the license costs on those, because as those scale up, or as things scale up on your servers, the cost of that software scales up as well. You've got the just game server costs, the bandwidth there. I don't know what else is there. What can you guys think?
I think
like
the
web presence type stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is like the problem with that question specifically is it is saying dedicated server costs. Well, there's not, like, obviously that's only the costs that you list, but if you want to be a bit broader than that, if you are making a game, the additional costs are the websites and the website hosting, and there's other stuff too that people don't think about, like the domain security registration and paying for your SSL certificates. And well, you can also get those generated for free, but there's a whole thing. Either way, there's a lot of additional costs in web-based stuff. And this doesn't even get into the fact that if your game gets large enough, you're also going to want to deal with having support or having maintenance for that, or email. You're paying for whatever email blasts you're doing for your for sending out updates to people. There's a lot of hidden small costs that do tend to add up.
Yeah, I feel like I should bring on a friend who does a lot of ops stuff sometime and just go through these kinds of questions too, because they know like exactly all of the things that get paid for that you don't think about. Because I've talked to guys who are running like operations teams for some of the games before, and they'll tell me about some costs for things, and I'm just blown away. Like, oh, I didn't even realize we had all of those servers that we needed them. Because I mean, a lot of things like when you've got dedicated servers for your game, you've got development servers for doing your dev work. You've got live servers. You've got sometimes like staging and test servers. Usually, an environment where you're pushing things out to, before it goes to live, and you're doing some testing. You may end up with 4 or 5 even different environments to set up, and then everything is scaled up there too. So it can be a lot. And then somebody asked, I want to take this last one, and then I just jump on to stuff. Have any of you used the Ultimate MMO asset? And I wanted to take this just because I played with it a bit, and I would say that, yeah, it seems like a good place to start. If you want to build an MMO and you've got some game dev experience, no idea how you want to build the MMO though, and want to go through the process, it does seem like a pretty good kickoff point. I believe they're using Mirror throughout the whole system, so it should be pretty good on the networking. Although, again, I haven't used it in depth. I haven't used it to build out a full giant game. No idea how well it would scale. If you get 100 players in there, maybe it's going to have problems. I really don't know. But if you get 100 players in there, then deal with that problem. Then get the 100 players and then worry about it. Build out the game and start with that, I'd say. Anyway, yeah, I wanted to just, I guess, stop taking questions for a bit because we're getting kind of short on time, and talk a little bit about the 10x developer idea, because I think we briefly touched on this a little bit last week, right? About the whole debate on whether it's a real thing, whether or not there really are developers that are 10 times as productive as the average developer or the regular developer on the team, or just developers that are 1/10 as productive, because that's another way to go about it, right? Before we do though, make sure that you hit the like, subscribe, and share buttons. I got to get into the habit of just reminding everybody. It really helps. I mean, it makes a big difference to me, at least. It makes me smile, and like gets lots of likes, and then views pop in and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I've heard a lot of just debate on this. Like, a lot of people think that it's just crazy nonsense, and that no one developer is worth the cost of 10 developers. I don't know. I don't even know where to go on this, right? Because it's just
I used to disagree with this a lot. As a developer, I used to think this was some smug way for people anyone who brands themselves as that. It's kind of like, what's the old saying? If you're actually cool, you never need to call yourself cool because other people do, or whatever. Something to that effect. It used to be the kind of thing where people would brand themselves, and it wouldn't be that's a clear indicator that it means nothing. It's just Silicon Valley buzzwords for people who are good at stuff. But that's not what it means. And I think this is the common conflation. It wasn't until I started getting to the other side of the table, I started doing hiring, I started dealing with people where I had work I wanted done, and I had to have other people work with or for me, that I started to really see what this means. And the truth is, it's not about X developer is 10 times faster at typing, or 10 times better at writing code, or 10 times smarter. It's none of those things. What it means is that financially, value-wise, as a business, the value your company will get from that person sitting in their desk every day will be 10 times greater. And that is not only not a myth, it is 100% true. Like, the difference isn't down to individual skill, it's down to experience more than anything. And so the example that I've given before, and this is just a small thing, I'm currently making a small project for myself, and this is just a classic example. I put on a bunch of text areas. So I have a UI, and it's got like 20 little places where there are text, some titles, some paragraphs of text, and it's like a little, almost like a little book made in Unity. Again, not really relevant what the project is. My point is, though, there are two kinds of fonts: titles, body text. And I know later on that I'm going to think about changing those fonts. And so to me, I was like, this is a point of change. There's a piece in my code that is likely to change. And if I weigh it up now, the cost of changing, the effort wise cost of changing 30 to 40 TextMesh Pro objects by opening them, finding each one, and then setting it to the right one is not really worth it. Especially if I get 40 fonts and I go, which one do I want to try? Let's try each one of these out. The exponential time cost of that is exhausting. Like, you don't want to be doing that. And so it's very simple. I just made a thing called style. It has a single reference to a font thing in it, and I gave every one of them that object instead of dragging the reference in itself. And then I'm using iNotify property change and a few other bits, but effectively it means I now have one place to change that. And if I decide, which I did, is I made a little script that lets me open a scene and then check two different fonts, and I can like randomize it and go, "Ooh, I want this one, or what about this one?" Or okay, I like this combination, and because it's a scriptable object, it will save. Now, the system I wrote isn't important. What is important is I, from experience, realized that this is a thing that's likely to change, and it's likely to change, and the cost of that change is exponential. That is like a week's worth of work. And so the 10x thing is, if you put an inexperienced developer in that seat, they will have dragged in everything themselves. And then when the time comes, the designer comes back and says, "Hey guys, we bought this new font. It's our new brand. Place it in everywhere." They'll do the perfectly reasonable thing of dragging that font in to every single thing again, and it'll cost them a few hours. So that developer, and then if the designers come back again and say, "Actually, we changed our mind, the new font doesn't test well, can you put the old one back?" They're now doing the same thing again, and they've lost 6 or 7 hours when I will have dragged in one thing into one field one time, and those 6 or 7 hours would actually be 2 minutes. So the difference is knowing how to solve these problems and how to avoid change. So I think that's the big thing people miss, is a lot of the stuff that I do is designing systems with an eye for what will change. Now again, it's not preemptively over engineering. I'm not writing a font manager. I am simply saying this is a point of change, so I put a hook in place so that change is easy to deal with later. And I can think of tons of examples of this. Like, there's so many things in code that I've done. A tab system is another one. I worked on a project where there was a bunch of tabs across the top for different areas, and those tabs were still in flux. It was still designing the project. So some of the tabs were changing, which tabs were there were changing. And the way it was done before was people would drag some prefabs in and start lining things up and making sure the objects are there. And then when the tabs get renamed, they have to shift the sizes and move things around and all this stuff. I made a thing that takes in, it's got a parent object with a bunch of children. For each child, it reads the name, creates a tab for each name, shows the tab pages, and then it animates between them when you click the buttons. It auto hooks up the buttons to the correct names of the pages. I did that once, took me 40 minutes or so, and now I have in perpetuity solved tabs. If we get more tabs, I change them all. And also, it adds an extra side effect, which is later on I decided to animate those tabs. And so, rather than having to animate or change the scripts on 12 tabs, I change it in the generator, and the generator does it for everything across the entire application. So, in short, the 10x thing is not about being a super fast typer. It's actually about just taking your time, looking at a problem, seeing where problems will arise, where scales will get bigger and things will get harder, and saving yourself headaches by working smarter, not harder, you know?
Yeah. With that, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just anticipating potential roadblocks, anticipating future problems, and that experience is essentially what's going to drive a lot of that. Somebody has been experienced enough to know that when we do XYZ, this is likely to happen. Therefore, I should do it like this in order to avoid that in the future.
Yeah. And I think that experience has to be somewhat specific and relevant to, or the more specific and relevant it is, the more of an impact that makes. If you've got the easiest example is just you've got a developer that's been working on a project for 10 years versus one that's been working on it for 1 year. That developer that's been working for 10 years has a lot more inside knowledge on how things work, what can go wrong, what the potential pitfalls are, and what the realistic timeline and realistic goals are of what's going to happen. I think a lot of the time people come in to a company and join a project thinking that there's some big giant plan, and they over, like you were saying, that you really work hard to avoid, is over engineer things, and it knocks down that productivity. So it's a lot of the time that the 10x part isn't so much about being 10x better, it's about being 1/10 as distracted by the wrong path or the repeatable grunt work that you could automate. Right, there are a lot of things that you can automate that can speed things up. You can probably double your productivity just off of automating things. It's like one of the portions, right? Gets you like halfway there, and then the other parts are just avoiding the mistakes and going down the wrong path, avoiding over engineering or under engineering in some cases, so that usually the under engineering can be replaced with automation or a little bit of an update, and it's a huge difference. I mean, it's people don't like it, and sometimes when people are in that boat, and like there's a little bit of chat about it, sometimes when people are the person that's 10 times more productive, they're not very liked, and they either because they're a dick about it, right? They're just going around talking about how everybody else is nowhere near as fast or as good as them, or just because people associate that with, because they're getting so much more done and people are talking about what they're doing.
Yeah,
And
it
I've
sets
seen
a
it both
curve of
ways.
expectation too. Yeah, people don't like it when you're like, because then you're used as a metric by managers to say, well, look how much they're getting done. You should get more done. And that's again, I'll fully admit, the culture around it can be very toxic because it's often misunderstood. It's got that feeling that it just means that person is awesome at doing stuff. It's not. It just means they know the problem domain better. So I won't deny it's probably not a healthy thing at a business level that it's talked about that way. But again, I think I can speak for all of us here that we've been on the other side of that kind of side of it. Um, like you can deny that you can admit you don't like it, but the truth is when you are spending your money to hire people, you have to ask yourself these questions. How much is this person going to cost me? And you could have somebody who's really, you enjoy working with them, they're nice, they're friendly, they do good work, but they do it literally 8 to 10 times slower than somebody else at the same rate. That is costing you money, and you have to sometimes be very brutally honest about this because it is something that matters. And like I've seen this so many times. I've been brought into companies where something goes wrong and somebody's like, "Oh, this broke and it took 2 weeks to fix." And I'm like, "That's insane. It should take like 30 minutes to fix. Like it shouldn't be 2 weeks gone because it wasn't conceived of as a risk at the time." And this is just experience. Things should be designed so they support change. And so yeah, it's not it can be an unfortunate conversation to have, but again, if you I think a lot of developers, if you've never been on the hiring side, it's very easy to discount this and say it's all business speak and it's horrible and it shouldn't be really be used. But until it's your money and your time and it's down to the success of like you're betting your business, your entire finances on this company succeeding, and you've got somebody just saying, "Come on, man, don't crowd me. I'm just trying to do my job." It's like, well, this isn't about being a nice person, unfortunately. It's about being fair about the fact that this is a job, it's a business that needs to be done. And if you're talking about the Pareto principle, um, this people don't really realize this, but it's true in every scenario, in every company you've ever worked for. 20% of the people at that company are doing 80% of the work. That's just always the truth because there's always really productive people and then there's everybody else. Now, everybody else, that's not to say everyone's a waste and you can't just keep culling it down till you get the 20% every time because the truth is those other people take the slack off the people who are doing the optimal work. But it's always going to be that way. You're always going to have a distribution where 20% are just so much better than everybody else. And this isn't just people. This is 20% of classical music represents all listened to classical music. 20% of video games are the most played video games of all the video games in the world, etc., etc. This is just the way the world works. There's always that 20% at the top. And when it comes to development, this isn't saying that you have to be one or the other, or this is like an optimal way to be. It's just being aware that this is a concern for business people. When it comes to jobs, like, some people are just going to be better at either managing their time, managing their resources, or answering business requirements. And so my biggest life lesson for people out there trying to get into this sort of programming as a career, I have worked with people who are better programmers than me, better, smarter people, but they suck because whenever a manager asks them for something, they're like, oh, I don't know, it'll take this time, it'll do whatever, and they take longer to do the project, and the results they give are faster, more like to the metal memory performant, but they're not what the client asked for. And when the client changes their mind, they roll their eyes and say, well, that's not the requirements you gave me. You told me it does this. People hate working with them. They take a long time to do work. So knowing the difference between what you think the job is and what the job actually is, and being able to quickly iterate on what the requirements are by the client, is 10 times more important. And so you have to leave the ego at the door. The irony is, true 10x developers are the ones with the least ego, because they're not about writing code they enjoy. They're about writing code that that does what the client wants. So yeah, it's that you just have to sit back and look at what your job is. You're being paid to add value to a business. And even if it's you making your own game, you may not think about it that way, but you're paying yourself. Your own time is being spent that you could be paid by somebody else to do something. So every minute you spend on your own projects is your time and your money, and you want to make sure you're being paid well.
I think the considerations from the person who's paying, whoever's paying you to do the work, there's more than just, you know, the raw money being spent on a project. There's also the amount of time the project owner, the manager, whoever it is, has to spend dealing with you. And, you know, that's straight up time. I'd rather pay someone $500 an hour and know that in 2 hours they're going to get me a perfect project than pay someone $20 an hour and spend 30 hours of my own time trying to, you know, get them to do it right, even though I saved a ton of money because now I spent 30 hours. And then there's things like opportunity costs. You know, if somebody takes 3 weeks to do something that somebody else would take 1 week to do for the same outcome, regardless of what it looks like underneath and all the other stuff, for the exact same outcome, that's 2 weeks of opportunity costs sunk, where I could have gotten a product out faster. I could have gotten feedback faster. I could have done who knows what else because something was done faster. And I think for, you know, when I'm thinking about this and hearing Jason talk, a lot of it sounds to me like a 10xer would understand what corners can be cut, what corners should be cut, what things to not focus on because it doesn't matter. Like, you know, if we think of, like, you know, the resolution of a video on a TV that's 50 feet away doesn't have to be very big. So if you know your TV is going to be 50 feet away from you, what resolution are you going to, you know, work towards? And if it's going to take you a lot longer to make a 4K video versus a 1K video, I don't know if this analogy makes any sense.
Well, it's the same for like your background props, right?
Sure.
The detail level of your background props.
Yeah. Well, actually, there's a good example. Kitbash 3D. Many of us may have heard of Kitbash 3D. It's on the Asset Store. It's a very big name. They do, you know, really good work. They've got really compelling work. If you look at their stuff up close, it doesn't work in a first-person shooter or a first-person RPG because they don't have things like a handle on their door. They don't need a handle on their door. They don't need to close certain gaps in the geometry because you're never going to see it that close. So they don't spend the time making all those details that don't matter. And they still get a great product in the end.
And I think to speak to your point there, so I think if there's any superpower that a contractor has, and this is just, I've heard a lot of positive things from people I've worked with where they like working with me, and this is just so. From what I've heard, I asked why. I said, "Why? What do you like about when you work with me and the people I work with, rather than previous people you've worked in the past?" And one of the comments they said was that a lot of the times when you hire a company or you hire a contractor, they'll do exactly what you ask for, but not try to figure out why you're doing it. And so what happens is, and I've seen this so many times, they'll hire a contracting crowd and they'll say, we want a system that can do X. A great example of this is in VR. I've had clients come to me and say, we want to be able to have this thing where you can fly around and just do all of this cool stuff and backflips and all this kind of crazy stuff. And they'll hire some random contracting firm, and the contracting firm will say, yep, we'll do it. And they'll put it together, they'll give it back to the client, and the client goes, oh God, this makes me feel sick. It's horrible. And they're like, oh yeah, we know, you should never do that in VR. But like, they don't care because they're not trying to help the client. They are trying to do the job they're paid for, and that's it. If a client comes to me with an idea, I will say, okay, we can do it that way, but I've been doing this for this long. This is why we shouldn't do that probably. If you want to, we can, but here's some alternatives. Here's the stuff I've worked on in the past, which is like that, and here's some alternative recommendations that you could do. And I help them with what their goal is. I say, why do you want that in the first place? Oh, well, we want this to feel dramatic and whatever. And it says, okay, well, how about if the goal is to make it dramatic, let's do this instead. This will get you your goal, but it will also conform to the standards. It'll also mean that it'll be allowed to be published on the asset stores, where some stores won't let it if it makes people sick or whatever. So I think a lot of the problems come down to your intentionality as a developer. And this comes down to speed. Like, it's not just about being a nice person. If you do it the work to rule method the first way, you are almost doing it on purpose so that it'll be wrong, so they'll come back to you and you have to do it again. Well, I would rather do it right the first time and have everybody happy. Like, and this is, I've said this before, it's from a personal experience. When I first started working for a company, I felt like a cog in a wheel. I didn't really care that much, and I would do exactly what I was asked for, nothing more, and I wouldn't investigate it. I didn't care what the question was. So if I got asked to build a system where they said, I want to be able to log in and do this and do these different things, I'd say, cool, I'll build you a login system. And I would write right down to the minute, it'll take me this long. I have to write this code, these systems, and I will do it. I hand it back to them, and they would say, okay, cool, where's the log out button? And I said, you never asked for a log out button. That would take more time, more of my time to develop. I'll do it, but that's a separate requirement. You need to write it down, you need it signed off on, and I'll make that system. Now, I knew this before I even started, but because I didn't care, and my goal was, I'm not being paid to work on extra stuff, and nobody will thank me if I do extra work, and mostly the people are treating me like crap anyway, so I'll do exactly what I should do and nothing more. In contrast, I now say, hang on a second, are you trying to do a login thing? Well, if you are, have you thought about logging out? Have you thought about the security for the account? Have you thought about these things? This is how long that will take. These are the parts of it. And they say, okay, well, yes, that's a lot more work than we thought. It says, it is, but how about we don't do this one for now, but keep in mind you'll need that later, or these kinds of things, or we can make a fake account. And I try to get them to understand the problem because I'm the person they're hiring. I know the problem better than they do. And so it's a difference between working with them and getting it right the first time than, not doing that. And this is really like, these are all small things that feel like it's out of scope for the question of being a 10x proficient developer. But it's not. It's about understanding problems and doing it efficiently.
Yeah. That all made sense to me. I think this follow-up question, though, is kind of interesting because I feel like maybe we've missed something here. Because in my opinion, the question says, doesn't this 10x approach only / mostly produce throwaway products? And I would say it's almost the opposite. Yeah.
Yeah, exact opposite. Yeah. So here's the thing: if you're writing stuff, I call it work to rule because that's kind of the general philosophy. It's where people write exactly to the letter of what's required. Um, that's what's called a rigid design, as Bob Martin would call it. If a system is rigid, it can only support the thing it was asked for at first. And as I've said, is like the difference between a throwaway product and a long-term product is change. A throwaway product has one spec, you do it once, it's locked in, and you sell it and it works. A large-scale project changes. And so the trick to having a sustainable large project is supporting change. And the way you support change is you understand what's going to change, and you, rather than doing the complicated thing, you allow to change it to a complicated thing. For example, we talked about saving. If I had a project and I wanted to save it, what I would do is I would create a thing called saver. I would call a save function, and I would just dump the entire state of an object as a piece of text, JSON file or something. And I will load it back in again, and I will forget about it. I am done. Checkbox. I have finished the save requirement that we have right now. It persists. Let's move on with the other requirements. And at some stage, someone says, The save files are too big, it's not performant, doesn't work multiple projects. Cool, we have a new requirement. We now need to move to a web service or to a database or something. That is now a new piece of work. I'll do that. But because I made a contract for the saving, I can swap out what was there for the new one. So it's the experience of knowing how to draw those boundary lines that I know that I can do the dirtiest version, the quick and dirty one, but I do it behind a boundary line that allows me to change that later. So if anything, it's the opposite. If I was to just write the correct answer the first time, then if I do change my mind, I have to gut the whole thing and redo it. But if I instead figure out what's the actual philosophy here, is my game actually a game built on SQL or built on JSON.NET? No, it's a game that has a saving requirement. And so if I make a saving requirement and I do the simplest version of save, I've solved the requirement we have, and I can revisit that problem later if the requirement changes.
I want to pop up two things that showed up here. So first was the comments that I don't want to be a 10x developer because I just want to stay alive longer. I just want to note that like it has nothing to do with like working 10 times harder. Still working the same amount,
Yeah,
just
in fact,
getting a lot more done with the same amount of effort is the goal. And it's a lot about not wasting effort and working a little bit less to get working a lot less to get the same amount done, and the same amount of work to get a whole lot more done, and just not doing the things that you don't need to do.
Here's a really hot take too that a lot of people don't realize. Well, it's not advantageous for our current points in our career, but all three of us here, if we truly wanted to, we could just take off work for 3 months. We're at a point in our career and a point in the way we work for stuff that we could just go on a 3-month holiday because we're not beholden to the structure of a standard job because we've worked in a way that's efficient with stuff we're doing. So I think like a lot of people don't realize this. It's not about working 24/7 flat out all of the time. It's about if I sit and look at a problem for a while. Like I forgot. There's a famous quote too. I wish I could remember who said it, but it was something along the lines of, if I have to solve a problem and I've got 1 hour to do it, I'll spend 40 minutes staring at it and 20 minutes solving it. Because figuring out what you're going to spend your time on is more valuable than just rushing in and making a mess. And that's the difference. People who are just racing through and solving problems, they're going to end up having to clean up the mess they made behind them. But if you take your time and solve it diligently, you won't have to do that. And if stuff changes, you can change it in a clever way. So actually, I have a lot more free time now than I did when I had a 9-to-5 job in multiple different companies because I get a project that's a problem a client has. I think about it. I solve it in a few weeks, and I move on to another project, right? Or another problem. Like it's not. You actually have a lot more time, in my opinion, if you start working efficiently.
I think it gives you the freedom to choose what you work on and how you work on it, and it gives you the ability. This is kind of more of a macro view of the same thing. The ability to say no to the things that are going to waste your time, right? And the ability to drop things that are wasting your time or are not going to work the way you want it to be. So if I have, for instance, 10 characters being worked on, and I know that 3 of them are going to make most of the money, I kind of should drop the other characters and focus on the 3 that are going to make the money, because that means I am 10xing my own process, my own business. And it doesn't mean we're doing more work. It actually means we're doing less work. We're just being more efficient. We're, like Jason, he said, work smarter, not harder. And that gives you then the freedom to now have more time to focus on more efficiencies and more things that are going to make everything get even more productive. So whether it's developing, whether it's moving boxes from here to there, if you're going to move, you could use your car, or you could take some time, get a U-Haul truck, and make one trip, and you'll move your house much faster than if you do the quick and dirty. It's just having the freedom and the knowledge and tool set to make the efficient choices.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, I think that it's interesting when you got to moving. I was going to jump into some code stuff, but I think about it with almost any job that's not code related, like anything that you're not as good as a professional at or an expert at, they're going to be 10 times more productive, and you'll be able to see it pretty quick. And I wanted to pop up this comment real quick that Dan had mentioned too, because I think it of ties it all together with the amount of work that you're doing and how the technical debt kind of ties in. So he said, in my general software job, the main difference is not speed, but the amount of technical debt that's created. So the team mix can make the difference between the project getting slower or faster. And that's just that the developers that are, in your 10x developer are going to be the ones that are ideally, or they really are going to be the ones that aren't causing a lot of technical debt. They're not making a lot of big opinionated decisions that they don't need to make for no reason, that are slowing things down or causing other problems with the game, or the game or the project. And they're thinking through, how is this with the other systems? Because coding something once the first time is usually the fastest. The second you got to go back to it and like recode it and fix it because more changes have broken it. Like, you've slowed that X now down to 5, and then you do it again, you're down to that 2.5, and soon you're back down to 1 or below, and you're a 1/10 developer because you're over engineering everything and adding a bunch of technical debt and making it so that every change is more and more difficult and requires a whole new framework change. And we got to so
Yeah, I would say that the 10x stuff. If we're talking about why this is, right? So I agree 50% with the idea that it's technical debt. Technical debt is a huge, huge cost that grows over the time of a project. But the second half of that, I think it's equally as important, is ownership of the project. So it's the fact that a lot of people don't actually care if a project succeeds or how it works. And so in general, it's about also understanding what that is. So when it comes to a project like this, it's also, did you get the requirements right the first time? So it's not just about not adding technical debt, it's about ensuring you're actually making the thing that you need to make, that you're not making the wrong thing altogether. And that's, I think, a big missed cost that a lot of people don't realize, because it will change, but can you avoid how many times it will change? If you take the time to understand the problem domain, why it exists, why is this project even being made in the first place, you can cut out a lot of wasted time by making it closer to the end objective without having to go the wrong route.
I like this picture too. I just popped it up. The wheels.
Yeah. Whenever we talk about this, that's the one that always comes to my mind. That's the one that because I've had this conversation with people so many times. I've literally had people panicked working on a project. They're in a hurry. There's a deadline coming up, and I'm like, the right way to do this is to step back and do some tests. And they're like, I can't write tests now. I'm in a hurry. And it's like, okay, but now you're going to spend the next week trying to solve this problem when you could have stopped, written the tests, and then immediately found the problem, and then you wouldn't have this problem next time. But yeah.
There are certainly folks in any team on any project who could be negative productivity to the point where they, for whatever they're doing, you can fill in the blank there, but any team, somebody could be doing some activity, some action that is making the entire team less productive, that to the point where removing them from the team would make the entire team more productive without any other change. And you can imagine that in comparison, somebody who's the opposite would appear 10x of that first person who's negative X. I don't know how you'd phrase negative X, but negative X.
Well, a 1/10 developer.
Yeah. Right.
So,
and that kind of what you're saying about that too is there's another great quote by it was Bill Gates, which says, "I choose lazy people to do hard jobs because they'll find an easy way to do it." And I think that's one of those things that when it comes to this question about age or about experience, the truth is, the older you get, the less patience you have. You enjoy the experiment when you're younger of ooh, I'll research this problem and I'll try out different things and whatever. When you're older and it's about getting it done, it's just, I don't care. I want it to work. I want it to work fast. I don't want to waste my time. And so a lot of it's down to just not having the patience to go through the adventure anymore. And if that's the case, people tend to find smarter ways to work. So that tends to be why.
Cool. So there was another question, and then I also am going to put up the live stream that Andrew's going to be doing soon. So I'm going to drop that into the description right away so everybody can get that kind of queued up. He's going to be going through and doing some code and stuff. And you want to talk a little bit about that before we jump into this question, what you're going to be doing later?
Yeah. So as many of you may have known, if you've been watching this for a while, I am not the most experienced coder, but I am working on a game, and I like to live stream that process from time to time. So today I will be working on getting spells casted and just basically spell system in this fantasy RPG. So basically I do coding and Unity and Writer and talk about it and work through problems, and people who watch sometimes help me solve those problems. It's a fun time.
Yeah, it's definitely cool. I'm putting it in as a, oh, come on, will it let me do it? A redirect? Or is it only going to allow me to do it to my own videos? It won't let me do it to others. So I put it in the description, and I'm gonna drop it into the chat so everybody can join and check that out. I'm gonna try to check that out too. I'll probably be laying in bed checking it out, but watching it either way. I wanted to hit this question though before we start to wrap things up about, have you noticed an age where devs peak, or a general age where you've noticed people 10x? Plus, is there an age where you've seen dev skills wane? So this has been I would say somewhat varied for me, but I would say it's probably around like 7 or 8 years of experience. Not so much an age, but around like 7 or 8 years of consistent experience working on something in similar types of problems. People tend to get really good at it. Some people do it quite a bit earlier, and some people just never do. A lot of people just never kind of really grow their experience beyond. There are a lot of people who work for 15 years and just kind of do the same thing at year 15 that they were doing at year 2 or 3, and they don't really continue improving those skills. But in general, I would say right around 6, 7, 8 years of experience. And there's not really an age where I've seen developers get worse. Generally, as I talk to developers who are actively, they get better and better. What you see with people who are older and developers that are not good at development, it's just that they haven't actually done any coding in a very long time, or they haven't done any significant new coding in a very long time. Like, they've done some stuff a long time ago, they were good at it, and they just haven't needed to, or had like a driving force pushing them towards doing the new stuff. So their skills start to disappear. It's more about how long it's been since you've been writing code and developing things on a project, than age, I think, for skills waning. And even then, it's going to be more of the technical specific skills to the type of thing that you're working on. The higher level stuff should generally stay around, I would think, but I don't know. Maybe that also fades. You guys got thoughts on being a developer and ages?
I think it likely a lot of this is, someone in the chat mentioned soft skills, and I think it's a lot of personality sort of things and working with others. Skills that do take time to learn. They are social skills ultimately. I would assume that there is a point at which it's not necessarily a peak, but people ramp up. It's not much different than any fantasy RPG or something where you level up really quick at the beginning, but the higher you get, the longer it takes and the harder it gets to level up. I think it's very similar to that. Maybe after 6 months to a year of working in a team where you've got really good role models modeling this behavior, if you're open to changing yourself and you're open to being a different person and learning new things and modifying your behavior, then maybe 6 months to a year, somebody will get to the point where everyone else notices, hey, they're really peaking. Perhaps they're still going to grow. You should always grow. And then at some point, maybe someone, we've all probably met people who get jaded. And after a certain while, they get to the point where they're kind of over it. Maybe they're just waiting out for, their pension, or waiting out because this is just what they do and they don't want to get another job, or who knows what. But maybe they stop forgetting those skills and they start devolving for other reasons. But I don't think that has to happen.
I have a hot take on this one, which is, from my experience, everyone's got skills that they're good at and stuff that they're lacking. And when we're trying to improve ourselves, we think the right answer is to keep shoring up the edges of stuff that we're already good at. So I see a lot of developers who are really good at maths or really good at a particular thing, and they just absorb all of the content related to that area. They're already in 80 out of 100, and they spend their time getting to 87%. But the truth is, the people who really excel are the people who stop and go, wait a minute, I'm actually pretty bad at the social stuff, or I'm pretty bad at the project management stuff, or I'm not really good at this area at all, and they shore up their actual weak points. In my case, again, I've said this before, if you were to meet me 10, 15, maybe even 20 years ago, and asked what your dream job is, it would be give me a box with a computer in it that I can then live in, and then requirements come through the door, I write the code, and I send it back, and I don't have to deal with people. And I perfectly enjoyed code, and I have a million books on software architecture because that's the stuff I enjoy doing. And I told myself it was self-improvement to get better and better at software architecture. But when I'm already reading more than 90% of other people on the subject, am I really making myself that much better, or am I just wasting my time? And the truth is, to get better and to really improve and to scale up, I had to stop and go, but I hate dealing with people. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's maybe the stuff that I need to improve is the stuff I hate doing. I have to get better at the stuff that I don't like. And so over time, the stuff that I improved on was all of the stuff that I understood the business more. I understood requirements more. I learned how to gather requirements from users. I understood the business side of it. I understood how to deal with projects on a larger scale. And I understand how to tie the lines between what a business wants and what I want to deliver. And the 10x portion, if we're sticking with that metaphor, boils down to rounding yourself out with the areas you're weakest at. It's like, because to go from terrible to moderately okay at something doesn't take a lot of effort. It actually takes considerably less effort to go from I can't even do the basics to doing the basics. But going from 85% to 87% is hell. It takes so much effort to get that much better at an increment of stuff. So if you look at all of the stuff you're missing, all of the things you're not good at, if you're good at the code, learn the art. If you're good at the art, learn the code. If whatever it is, it may seem daunting, but to go from if you're up against another artist and you've got a tiny bit of code, you're 10 times more valuable because you can fix small issues without bothering a developer. And likewise, if you're a programmer and you know just enough art to pull a model into a modeling tool and like fix an issue with the rig, or to maybe change the LODs or something with an automatic LOD tool, you've now saved so much energy from having to mess with dealing with an artist and different stuff. So like, these are the things that make you better. It's not like getting yourself slightly percentage better at something you think you're good at. It's fixing your weak spots. So there's a quote, again, can never remember who said quotes, but it's in the shadows is the parts that will improve you the most. It's the bit that you're avoiding is the bit that will cause the most growth for you. And so whatever it is, you're like, I'd hate to have to do that for a living. Well, then just learn it enough that it doesn't scare you anymore. It just becomes a useful tool. You don't have to do it for a living, but at least it stops being scary, you know?
I think that's great advice. Just learning all that stuff. The best developers I know they're really good at one thing and pretty good at a bunch of other things. So it's a very, very valuable skill. All right, I think we'll get ready and just kind of wrap it up here. I'm already ready to go back to bed, but I wanted to say thanks everybody for coming out here. Make sure that you please hit the like button, subscribe, and just go to the stream somewhere. If you have other questions, we'll be back next week answering those and talk about a whole bunch of other interesting things. And also check out Andrew's live stream. I just linked it in chat again, and it's also down below in the description. It's right at the top of the description. You just kind of hop in and join it, and I'm sure Andrew will be doing lots of interesting things and talking about stuff too. Maybe you guys can go ask him a bunch more questions too. Hey, yeah. Frank, I hit you up later too, Frank. And all right, well, anything else you guys wanted to say before we wrap it up? Go send Jason some coffee over there. Check out all the links down below for that. And yeah, I guess that's it. Thanks again, everybody.
See y'all soon.
See. I gotta find my button again. There we go.